Welcome to the Tuesday, June 15th, 2021 regular meeting of the Walnut Creek City Council. As you can see, the City Council is conducting this meeting from the City Council chambers for the first time since March 2020, and we and staff are complying with the current regulation of the California Department of Public Health and Cal OSHA for safe indoor meetings. For now, the Council will continue to receive public comments through the Zoom meeting, but we hope to have the public join our Council meetings in person again at an upcoming meeting date to be announced. This meeting is being held in accordance with the Brown Act as currently in effect under the State Emergency Services Act, the Governor's Emergency Declaration related to COVID-19, and the Governor's Executive Order N-2920 issued on March 17, 2020 that allows attendance by members of the City Council, city staff, and the public to participate and conduct the meeting by video conference. Video conference locations are not open to the public. For this meeting, the City Council is participating from the Council Chamber at City Hall. As some attendees may be participating in their first Walnut Creek City meeting or their first teleconference meeting, I wanted to welcome everyone and talk briefly about the public comment process. For each agenda item, there will be an opportunity for public comment on the item. Thus, if you desire to speak to an item on the agenda this evening, please hold your comments until the Council considers that item. Additionally, we have a section on the agenda titled Public Communications, which is for public comments for items not on the agenda. Any comments during public communication should not relate to an item that is on the agenda this evening. Consistent with Section 9.5 of the City Council Handbook, 30 minutes will be initially allocated for public communications for items not on the agenda. Additional time for public communications for items not on the agenda will be provided at the end of the open session portion of the meeting if necessary. This process is consistent with Section 9.5 of the City Council Handbook, adopted July 15, 2014, and last amended on September 3, 2019, and will allow for all public comments to be received during the meeting for items not on the agenda. When I open the public comment period, use the raised hand feature or press *9 if you are connected by audio only, which will alert staff that you have a public comment you'd like to provide. We ask that everyone who wishes to speak on an open item, please use the raised hand feature to state your intent to speak when the item is called. Please wait your turn, and once brought into the meeting, state your name and the city of residence for the record. Please keep in mind that this is a city business meeting. The City Council has adopted rules of decorum to ensure that meetings are conducted efficiently and effectively, and that all members of the public have a full, fair, and equal opportunity to be heard. All remarks should be addressed to the City Council. Please do not use profanity during your comments. As the Council is conducting these meetings via video teleconference, and given the COVID-19 pandemic and the increased number of speakers that have wanted to make comments on various issues during our meetings and consistent with city policies related to public comments, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make your remarks. The Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. The Council will accept oral comments. Written comments submitted have been and will be posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record, but will not be separately read into the record. To provide a live remote public comment, join the Zoom video conference meeting. The meeting ID is 927-6962-7633, and the passcode is 560513. Should you choose to not provide comments but would like to view the meeting, you may do so in one of the following ways. YouTube Live, you can visit the City of Walnut Creek's YouTube channel. The cable broadcast, Comcast Channel 28 in the incorporated Walnut Creek area only, Rossmore Channel 26, Wave Channel 29, and AT&T U-verse Channel 99. And you can live stream it online on the city's website. And at this time, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And would the city clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Darling.
Present.
Councilmember Haskew.
Here.
Councilmember Silva.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois.
Here.
Mayor Wilk.
Here. Okay, first item on the agenda is a presentation for the Heroes Among Us program honorees. And I'm honored this evening to be able to share some good news with our Walnut Creek residents. Not just good news, but good stories about people who make a difference in our community. Over the past year, I've been struck by how many times people have shared stories with me about friends, family, and even strangers who've gone the extra mile to make things better during the pandemic. Unexpected acts of kindness, an ability to rally support for a cause, or a spontaneous gesture that makes a difference. It's the heroes in our community who rarely get noticed that add up to make a significant contribution in making Walnut Creek such a special place to live. And tonight, I'm proud to introduce you to all three heroes among us who have made just that kind of contribution. And first, I'd like you to meet Fran Gibson. Although if you live in Rossmore, you probably already know the name. As the president of the Rossmore Emergency Preparedness Organization, Fran has worked tirelessly to educate residents about what they need to know about COVID-19 and how to stay safe. Her unique expertise helped fulfill the mission, of the Rossmore EPO to provide information to residents about disaster preparedness to help them be ready to be self-sufficient during this or any other crisis. Beyond just helping people through the pandemic, she's brought in experts via Zoom to teach residents how to be safe during a disaster, when and when not to call 911, and basic emergency preparedness, and what everyone should have ready in a go bag should you have to leave your home unexpectedly. Working with city officials, county and Golden Rain Foundation staff, CERT, and many others, she's provided exceptional leadership to the Rossmore community. Fran, thank you. And I see that you're on Zoom. Please unmute yourself, and thank you so much for all the work that you have done. And if you'd like to say a few words.
I would, Mayor Wilk. Thank you so much for this tremendous honor, which I'm still stunned by and deeply honored by, and want to say the heroes among Mayor Wilk and City Council and Walnut Creek residents are the countless heroes that have been in our 32-year history here in Rossmore with the community, the Rossmore Emergency Preparedness Organization. Those 32 years have led to where we are today. We are only 15% of the population of Walnut Creek, and yet nationally we know that our age cohort, 65 and above, faces the greatest mortality and morbidity in all disasters and emergencies. So it is our mission here in EPO to help educate our residents as to their responsibility to get themselves and their households ready. We are delighted to have this opportunity to introduce the community to what we do. We look at Rossmore as well as our city and our county and our region, and we look at what is plaguing us in the future, the near future. We face earthquakes, wildfires, home fires, a deepening drought, extreme heat events, and climate change. We think that Walnut Creek is doing a wonderful job, and I hope that you will continue in your emergency preparedness plan, and that you will include us and our community. And we applaud what you are doing. And Mayor Wilk, I first met you when you were our liaison to Rossmore, so you did a fine job with that. Rossmore EPO and our 10,000 residents want to thank you for the work that all of you are doing on behalf of the safety and the well-being of this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. Thank you for all your work. Our next honoree isn't afraid to be recognized as the trash lady. More than a year ago, Karen Mariner noticed another unwelcome side effect of the pandemic, excess trash around Walnut Creek. Before long, she organized the community cleanup crew, reaching out to neighbors on Nextdoor and launching an effort that now includes more than 400 Walnut Creek residents. At least one Saturday per month, the cleanup crew takes to the streets with trash bags and a desire to make our city look beautiful. Not only do the streets look better because of her efforts, new friendships have developed. People have had a chance to get outside and see each other socially distanced and masked. And everyone involved feels a sense of community spirit. Karen, we can't thank you enough for your efforts. And I see Karen on the line right now. If you'd like to say a few words, Karen.
Thanks for this honor. It's great. Never, not exactly glamorous work or sexy in any way, but my daughter and I just got really tired of looking at all the trash on our ramps in particular. So one day we just got out and cleaned them, felt good, put a note up on next door, and now we have 400 people that at least have raised their hand and said, this is an important issue to them. They're driving to Oakland, they're driving to Alameda, and they're seeing what's happening when nobody is doing this kind of cleanup and what can happen. So I'm grateful to the city for recognizing the need to try to change our culture. The more we get out and clean the ramps, the more we hope and pray that people will see the work and think, why am I opening my window and throwing my garbage out the window? Maybe I should hold it until I get home. Really quick, I'm just going to show you kind of I can't take all this credit. I have a crew and share. So this was what we started out, the size of our crew. You could see pretty small, just the two of us with my daughter taking the picture in June of 2020. It seemed to get much worse during the pandemic. So I think that's where we started to see this big change. And then now this is what our crews look like. So we have hit a nerve. And, we offer people an opportunity. We provide vests and gloves and bags. We have loaners for trash pickers. We don't really want anybody breaking their back. And we work with Caltrans and the city to get the bags picked up once they're amassed. So we have a cleanup tomorrow. It's more than once a month. It's more like twice a month. And we try to do weekends and some evening nights to gather, different people who have different schedules. So as much promotion as the city is willing to give us, we will take it.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you so much. And truly, you do make our city more beautiful. Thank you, and to all of your teammates who have been helping all of these weeks and months.
You are welcome.
Our final hero this time also didn't expect this kind of recognition. He's been too busy trying to connect high school students to the help many so desperately need. Sina Farhadi founded a program in Mount Diablo School District known as LEAP, the Learning Enrichment and Assistance Program. LEAP is a student-run program that was created in January in partnership with the Homeless Outreach Education Program and Foster Youth Services. The goal is to pair high school tutors with unhoused or foster youth students in the district. Nearly 36 students have been matched so far as mentors to those in need of academic support. Teacher advisors act as a support systems, guiding the tutors when needed. LEAP has given students from across Mount Diablo School District access to resources they couldn't otherwise reach, and the program has garnered support beyond even just the school community. Sina remains busy even with the traditional school year over and working on a summer enrichment program. And did I mention that he's also finishing up his own education at Northgate High School? Heroes come in a variety of ages. Congratulations and thank you, Sina. And I see that you're on. If you'd like to unmute yourself and say a few words.
Yes, thank you, Mary Wilk. I was truly shocked and honored when I received the news. But like you said, we really started LEAP in hopes of providing resources for those who may not have had them, especially during the pandemic with, distance learning and all that. We really wanted to provide a helping hand for homeless and foster youth kids in the district. Our main goal is really just to kind of help push towards educational equity, and we're hope we're doing that step by step. Baby steps is kind of what it takes, but we're hoping that we're kind of sending a message, and the youth are really, really involved. And that was the main goal, is I really wanted to give an opportunity to the youth to get involved in issues that were so prominent in the area. So, and I'd also want to say that as I'm also a youth commissioner, and I really wanted to give a shout out to that whole program, just because I think that it shaped me just to kind of learn to take initiative and be civically engaged. And I truly think that this would not have been started if I didn't learn the skills that I did through that program. So thank you to them. Thank you to the whole entire Youth Commission, the school district, Sharice Cowan, and of course, all the tutors who are countlessly kind of providing tutoring every day, even during the summer. So thank you. And again, thank you for the honor.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Sina, and so glad that your involvement with Youth Commission has just been shown as so fruitful. And of course, everybody watch, because applications for that will be coming out in the near future. I want to thank you to all who submitted names of all of our local heroes. We'll be adding tonight's honorees to our city website, along with the names of others who were nominated. And we'll be back next month with another opportunity to share stories of those who have made a difference in our community, our Walnut Creek heroes among us. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the consent calendar. Does any council member wish to pull an item for discussion?
Yes, Mayor. I would like to pull item C and E for brief comments.
Okay. And does any member of the public wish to comment on an item on the consent calendar? Please use the raised hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio only, if you'd like to provide a public comment. For those who desire to provide public comments on a consent calendar item only, please raise your hand now. As a reminder, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make their oral remarks. The Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. Written comments submitted have been and will be posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record but will not be separately read into the record. At this time, I'll ask the city clerk if there are any members of the public who would like to provide comments.
Mayor Wilk, I don't see any of the members of the public to provide comment.
Okay, seeing no speakers, I'll ask the council if anyone would like to make a motion with regard to the consent calendar other than the items that have been pulled by Councilmember Silva.
I move to approve consent calendar A, B, D as corrected on the dais, F, G, and F through J.
All right,
Second.
we have a motion and a second. Would the city clerk please call roll?
May I also note that F and J were also corrected with the thing on the city, on the dais.
With the addendums on the dais, yes. So noted.
Councilmember Haskew,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois,
Aye.
Councilmember Darling,
Aye.
Councilmember Silva,
Aye.
Mayor Wilk.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. All right, if we want to talk about those items, Councilmember Silva, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Item 2C is the adoption of a memorandum of understanding for our Police Officers Association for future salaries. And I just want to thank the officers for their work this past year and a half in this pandemic and all of the work that you've had to give us in the community as first responders. And thank you for your cooperation and coming to an agreement on this continuing memorandum of understanding. And I'm happy to move the item.
Please do.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. City clerk, could you please call the roll on that item?
Councilmember Silva,
Aye.
Councilmember Haskew,
Aye.
Councilmember Darling,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois,
Aye.
Mayor Wilk.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. Brings us to the next.
Thank you very much. This is an item where we're going to adopt the 10-year capital improvement plan, and for 2022 to 2031, and I just want to thank Public Works staff for the work that it goes into this. During the pandemic, they are working from remotely. They are trying to put together 10 years worth of information to create a program that we can then follow over the next 10 years related to roads, storm drains, building maintenance, as well as park projects and transportation improvement projects. And so thank you to the staff, and I'm happy to move the item.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, and I definitely will agree with Councilmember Silva on those comments. City clerk, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Silva,
Aye.
Councilmember Haskew,
Aye.
Councilmember Darling,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois,
Aye.
Mayor Wilk.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. Next on the agenda is public communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for comments on items not on the agenda. Under the Brown Act, the council cannot act on items raised during public communications, but may respond briefly to statements made or questions posed, request clarification, or refer the item to staff. Consistent with Section 9.5 of the City Council Handbook, 30 minutes will be allocated at this time for public communications for items not on the agenda. Additional time for public communications for items not on the agenda will be provided at the end of the open session portion of the meeting if necessary. Does any member of the public wish to provide public comments at this time? Please use the raised hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio only, if you'd like to provide a public comment. For those who desire to provide public comments on an item not on the agenda, please raise your hand now so that we can identify the total number of speakers that desire to speak at this time. And as a reminder, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make your oral remarks. The Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. Written comments submitted have been posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record, but will not separately be read into the record. At this time, I'll note that the time is 6:23 p.m., and we will take public comments on items not on the agenda till approximately 6:53 p.m., and then the remainder of any such comments at the end of the open session portion of the meeting. City Clerk, are there any members of the public who would like to provide comments?
I show we have members of the public who wish to provide comment. I'll bring in Catherine Wally.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Good evening, Mayor, Council, and staff. This is Catherine Wally, resident of Walnut Creek, pronouns she, her. I would like to thank those managing this meeting for 2 steps that serve to protect free speech and public engagement. First, thank you for consistently having a visible timer. Secondly, I appreciate that speakers are always given the opportunity to ensure that they are heard, connected, and that technical glitches are resolved before starting the timer. I also wanted to bring to your attention a problem I've repeatedly observed at other public meetings in our state, which is time allotted to speakers when communicating through an interpreter. According to AB 1787, which was approved in 2016, when the legislative body of a local agency limits time for public comment, the legislative body of a local agency shall provide at least twice the allotted time to a member of the public who utilizes a translator to ensure that non-English speakers receive the same opportunity to directly address the legislative body of a local agency. Speaking as someone who's an interpreter by profession, the application of this bill is quite problematic when only the bare minimum of double time is allotted. It's a perfect case-book example of equality not amounting to equity. To achieve equity, we must take into consideration the ways in which the dynamics of consecutively interpreted interactions regularly require significantly more than double time. Some of these reasons include time to allow for interpreting processing time, recognizing that research indicates fewer errors occur with longer processing times, time to allow for turn taking between interpreter and speaker, time to consult to get clarification and correct errors, time for the interpreter to take and refer to notes, and time to allow for the fact that certain concepts may take longer to produce in the target language than in the source language. When the day comes that a member of the public speaks through an interpreter here at a meeting in Walnut Creek, I urge those managing the meeting to provide significantly more than double time to ensure true equity for those who have been historically excluded in public comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Next speaker.
I'm bringing over Jenny Schneider.
Good evening. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay. My name is Jenny Schneider, and I'm a resident and business owner in Walnut Creek. I'm here this evening in support of justiceformileshall.org. I want to start off by thanking Mayor Wilk and Councilman Francois for attending and speaking at the Miles Hall Foundation Memorial Brick Dedication event earlier this month. It was a beautiful day honoring those that have lost loved ones with a mental illness and all those affected by mental illness. Your attendance and words were heartfelt and inspiring, and in fact, inspired me to speak this evening. Tonight, I'm here asking Mayor Wilk and the City Council members to consider flying a mental health flag during the month of May, like the city does during the month of June for the LGBTQ+ community, to communicate the city's support for equality and respect to people with mental health challenges in our city. Health Awareness Month. The Pete Foundation, along with widespread collaborative from Louisville mental health organizations and advocates, as well as professionals from many other backgrounds, introduced the flag in 2020. The mental health flag represents support for all efforts in mental health. This mental health flag was created in collaboration with over 100 Louisville mental health organizations, care providers, artists, designers, advocates, and community members to convey efforts in mental health. Their goal is for the flag to become a global symbol for supporting mental health initiatives and all those affected by mental illness. I ask that the City of Walnut Creek consider flying the Pete Foundation's mental health flag during the month of May, and to recognize and celebrate May as Mental Health Awareness Month. Together and with this flag, we will bring mental health out of the darkness and into the light. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
Our next speaker is Ton Hall.
Hello, Mayor and City Council. I wanted to kind of echo what Jenny Snyder said about the brick event. We had the Miles Hall Foundation brick event last Saturday, which consisted of the foundation, the Miles Hall Foundation, being able to bring our community together, where we had tragedy with my son being shot and killed by the police. So other families were able to bring in their loved ones and purchase bricks, which I know that you, Mayor Wilk, and Councilmember Francois did. And we're really, really grateful for that. It was a really nice event, as you two know, and well attended throughout our community. And I just want to say that, you know, it's nice to see that we're able to work together to create community in Walnut Creek. I also really am happy that the Miles Hall Community Crisis Hub has been named in Miles's honor. And that's hoping that you as a city council were able to weigh in on that and were able to influence some of those decisions because, as we said, we want to make sure that that is the non-police response that so that other people won't suffer the same tragedy our family did. So I just, again, hope that as the Miles Hall Foundation gets established, that we can work together to create community, to make sure that there are safe places for people with mental illness, and that we have an inclusive community that will make sure that there's safety for others. So I want to just always say Miles Hall's name. He's always here with us, and he's never forgotten. And Miles Hall, thank you.
Thank you, Ton.
Our last speaker is Pete Bennett.
Sorry about that. The reset throws things off. I've been renamed Pete Bennett, 5605 513. Hey, listen, another body was found up on Jones Road, another homeless person that I probably know. And so I'm the homeless person in Walnut Creek that knows the other homeless people killed in Walnut Creek, who another homeless person was killed in Martinez. I know a lot of homeless people that have been killed. I know a number of Black people that have been killed, African American. One of them was my employee 37 years ago, 38, something like that. And, you know, it's a big horizon coming for me. You know, it's an anniversary I'm looking forward to. It has been a wonderful experience. On July 5th, 2011, my sons walked into the arms of Officer Anthony Keeler, never to be seen again. And then on July 7th, I got arrested. And then they took my son and my computers. And he called me up a couple of weeks later, a week after my car was totaled in Lafayette after I left Walnut Creek. I haven't been compensated for the truck that was towed away, the car that was towed away, my vehicles that have been set on fire and vandalized. And by the way, Kevin, I hope you're having a wonderful life, because my brother, an Experian provider, you know who they are, with the help of the Walnut Creek Police, stole my trust, which, by the way, what's emerging is connected to Jeffrey Epstein and David Rockefeller, who was my grandfather's client. It grows and grows and grows by the day. Wait for the federal court monitor and PG&E to come talk to you.
It looks like a couple more speakers' hands have been raised. I'm going to go ahead and bring in BG.
Hello, my name is Barbara Guinness, and I've lived in Walnut Creek since 1996. Today, I wanted to make a couple comments about the rare and threatened species that are in the area of the Lime Ridge proposed bike flow trail. The Alameda whip snake lives in the area surrounding Timberleaf Trail. Seen it multiple times. In the past, I've seen it, cross the trail, climb up a bush, because it's a very fast-moving snake and also a good climber. This year, I've seen it between Boundary Oak Golf Course and the head of Timberleaf Trail, so it's still in the area. I also saw one crossing the street in my neighborhood, because I live close to the open space. So they're still currently in the area. The Alameda whip snake was first listed as a threatened species under the California Endangered Species Act in 1971. And the U.S. Federal Endangered Species Act in 1997. So it should be, really protected. And if it's in the area where the proposed bike trail is supposed to go, it's, something we really need to think about. Another thing I'll just mention is the Mount Diablo horned lizard. It's not threatened, but it's, rare. And I see it right around the Paraiso Trail and Timberleaf Trail. It was hard for me to identify at first because it looks like a tiny little dinosaur without just spikes on it and things like that. But anyway, I found out what it is. It's the Mount Diablo horned lizard. And it used to be more prevalent, but people used to take them home, and I guess apparently they'd pass away because they're not used to that. Anyway, they're a rare sight, and they need to be preserved and, conservation efforts to keep them alive in that area. So thank you for thinking about those two species when you're considering the proposed Lime Ridge bike trail. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Susie Hansen. Susie, if you could unmute yourself. Susie, you can go ahead and speak now.
Susie, if you're there, please speak.
There we go. Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, thank you, City Council. Good evening, City Council members. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. I'm Susie Hansen. I'm the board chair of Festival Opera, and the artists and musicians and the patrons of Festival Opera want to include you in our 30th year celebration season this year. On July 11th, we'll be doing a live stream recital, probably on Facebook, of one of our artists, Lila Kazoom. She'll be singing a recital entitled A Ray of Hope. Then on August 1st in Civic Park at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we will have a free Opera in the Park concert for everybody. We will feature artists who will do solos and duets, and the chorus will be singing there as well. Then our main stage presentation will be a Jake Hagee triptych. Jake Hagee, most well known for his opera adaptation of Dead Man Walking, will be presenting a triptych, 3 one-act operas about love, loss, and the beauty of creating beautiful art. So we encourage you, the tickets are on sale now for the operas as of today at the Hoffman Theater. And we encourage you to come and enjoy it just as much as we do. We have something for everybody in our operas. I think you will enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susie. Do we have any further speakers?
Mayor, I don't show any additional hands raised.
Okay, we'll then close public communications for the evening. And we'll move on to council member and staff announcements, reports on activities, or requests. Do we have any closed session announcements?
Mr. Mayor, we do not have any reportable actions from closed session this evening.
And city manager reports.
Yes, good evening, Dan Buckshire, city manager. I do have 2 updates this evening. The first is an update related to the countywide mental health crisis response program. Last week was another major milestone in that there was what's called a rapid improvement event where the project team consisting of approximately 50 to 60 people met to further define and test the program. More specifically, there was considerable testing of the call center, which, as Ton Hall noted, was named the Miles Hall Call Center, and that was announced last Friday as part of the report out. And the team really focused on, obviously in addition to naming, but on really testing how to ensure that calls from multiple avenues come into the same hub and are methodically triaged to ensure the appropriate level of response. In addition, there has been considerable work on the types of response and the composition of those teams. And there are 3 tiers that are currently being considered that will be further vetted. And effectively, the lowest level response, what I mean is the least acute response, what might be considered a welfare check that police officers oftentimes do. It's intended that an emergency medical technician, an EMT, which is oftentimes a part of the fire department associated with ambulance response, would be paired with a non-licensed mental health clinician that would go out to these types of responses in order to evaluate and hopefully help address the situation. The second tier would be 2 mental health clinicians that would be dispatched to an incident or a call. This would be most akin to a Kahoot-style model in which non-law enforcement is the response, or clinicians that can hopefully help calm the situation and or bring in additional help or take those folks who are experiencing the crisis to get additional help. And then the third, which would be the most severe, in which there has been violence that has been demonstrated, a clinician would be paired with a member of law enforcement. And so as the call center is being further developed, the methodology is being put in place to best determine which type of team to deploy to the various type of circumstance. So that is underway. There are also looking to have 5 of these teams. I'm not sure of the exact mix yet. That's being worked through, but up and running by August 1st so that we can start deploying these in Contra Costa County. And then there is also a major milestone for a funding opportunity for this program, in that the Measure X, the countywide Board of Supervisors appointed Measure X Advisory Committee, is meeting on June 23rd. And the behavioral health, the focus, there are a series of meetings being held over a couple of months, and the focus is on behavioral health programs on June 23rd. This program will be presented just today. The city of Walnut Creek sent a letter signed by the mayor in support of this program. We are hoping to have all 19 cities in the county sign. I also know that our Chamber of Commerce, Walnut Creek Downtown, also sent in letters of support for funding for this program, and I believe there will be numerous other not-for-profit partners and those involved in mental health response will be attempting to support as well. Having some familiarity with the criteria related to Measure X, I'm hard pressed to think of a program that would be better suited for funding for this, because it truly is a crisis that needs to be addressed, and it truly is a county-wide effort between the county and all 19 cities. So stay tuned on that, and we'll likely be asking the mayor and possibly others to speak at that event on June 23rd to express our interest and support for this funding for this program. And then the second item that I am very pleased and proud to share is that earlier today, on behalf of Walnut Creek, I accepted an award from the California Emergency Services Association for our partnership between the City of Walnut Creek and the Golden Brain Foundation in support of the Rossmore community during COVID. As we know, for those that may be listening who may not be as familiar, Rossmore is a community of approximately 10,000 individuals. It is a senior community and represents about 1/7 of the Walnut Creek population. Obviously, during COVID, a very high-risk population. Very pleased to report that there were very few incidences of outbreak in Rossmore, and mortality rate was nearly zero. So it was tremendous work by Golden Brain to help secure the various facilities, put appropriate protocols in place for any public areas, and then doing so in partnership with Walnut Creek. One of the programs that I certainly take pride in, I think we all can, was our volunteer support program for seniors, where folks call in, particularly early on when there was a lot of fear and we were severely locked down, that we had volunteers that would do shopping for seniors, run errands, anything to help keep them socially isolated. And then in addition, there's a support line that we had a lot of folks who were suffering from isolation and the effects, and we had folks who were able to just talk to them, to lend a voice, to help them out. And so we received the award not only for helping keep folks physically safe, but for also providing social and emotional and mental support, health support throughout this program. So it was very nice to receive that recognition, and as you can imagine, it was online, and as soon as we receive the actual award, I will be pleased to bring it here to the council chambers for our next update. And that concludes my update this evening.
Thank you, Dan. Let me ask, and I was remiss previously that I should have asked the council if you had any comments or questions related to any of the speakers. So let's just wrap this up all together. Do you have any questions, comments of staff related to any of the public comments or of the city manager's report? Councilmember Silva.
On the public comment from Barbara G., can we get an update for council's edification on what the environmental review process is going to be related to the proposed trail and where we are in that process? It doesn't need to be tonight, but, and then the second question is, first of all, thank you for the update on the mental health crisis response program and the progress that's being made. I did watch the report out on Friday, and it was very impressive. You said 5 teams to be stood up by August 1, but I don't think 5 teams is what the whole county will need. Do you have some kind of estimate of how many teams we're going to need to run a 164-hour week, 24/7 operation, which is pretty substantial?
Yes, there are some preliminary estimates that will be refined further, but as it's looking at this point in time, the thought is that there would be 32 teams that would be needed to provide 24/7 coverage throughout the county based upon population and as well as call volume for 5150 mental health related type calls. They would be stationed throughout different areas of the county, and that would, likely be phased in probably over a couple years. It's not like that would even happen within 1 year, and that's part of what is being evaluated is what can we stand up now. Obviously, the 5 is the initial target. What is the plan to scale that up, and to what extent, over what period of time? And that's part of the planning process that's still underway.
So that's about 64 people. Does that encompass all 3 tiers of response? That obviously doesn't include PD, I would assume.
You're correct in that does include all 3 tiers of response. The part that I'm not clear on. There was a note of how many PD would be needed, and I'm not clear if they're suggesting there'd be additional that would be hired. I assume that we'd be drawing off our existing law enforcement.
And then in addition to that, there's management levels and supervisory levels and call center personnel. So these are just the field personnel.
That's correct. And then there's also equipment such as vehicles, telecommunications equipment, and the like. So this is a big effort, and there is going to be a big price tag associated with it as well. Just we don't have those estimates. The county is working on a range of what that could cost in preparation for the June 23rd Measure X Advisory Committee meeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Silva. And actually, I do have a question related to one of the public comments, and this is probably for the city attorney. It was regarding the one on interpreter time for comments. And is there a policy rule, or is there, I don't think we've had this issue come up before with somebody that needed an interpreter, but is this in the policy handbook, or how does this normally get fashioned?
Yeah, it's actually in the Brown Act. There is a requirement for some additional time when someone is using an interpreter for public comments. And I can advise the council on that. I don't recall whether it's double or not, but there is additional time that's provided, and I'll update the council on that.
So if somebody has a public comment and mentions they have an interpreter, we'll take that into consideration?
Correct. We would give them the amount of time that the statute requires. Yes.
Very good. Thank you. Oh, yes, Mayor Pro Tem Francois.
Thank you, Mayor. To the city manager on the Measure X Advisory Committee, how would the public participate in that? Is it going to be televised by Zoom, or how would they watch and provide comments?
They are being, I believe it's televised or broadcast through the county's system that they use. I believe it's a Brown Act committee, but I'm not 100% certain on that. So it is publicly noted. Anyone can go to the Contra Costa County website and find the meeting notes, meeting minutes, agenda, and information about how to participate, but it is fully open to the public.
Terrific. Thank you.
Okay. Next on the agenda is a public hearing, and the title is Oh, wow, and I've just gone right by, well, who wants to hear from the council members and the public? Okay. I mean, exactly. And Luella, this is why I have you right next to me, to remind me of these kind of things. So with that, I'm going to have you go first.
Gee, what a surprise. Okay, so during the time we were off, I got to attend two Contra Costa Transportation Authority Committee meetings because I served as the alternate for the Administration and Projects Committee. One was on Wednesday night and the other one was early on Thursday morning. I love this community, or I wouldn't have done it. At the Planning Commission, we reviewed the situation with the growth management reports, and I am proud to say that Walnut Creek was in there well within the time that it needed to, as opposed to many of our neighbors who still are being nurtured trying to get theirs in by the end of the month. We also had a discussion about whether we would go forward with Contra Costa Transportation's part of the Lafayette Trap Lane, which has to do with the new development at Deer Hill Road and the developer having to put in an extra lane to take care of the additional traffic. And we voted yes to forward it on. At the Administration and Projects Committee, we approved the budget for the year for Contra Costa Transportation Authority. We reviewed the legislation, federal and state, that has to do with transportation, and we approved moving forward to the full commission the items related to Innovate 680, a contract with Nissan to help develop the autonomous cars. I attended the Cal Cities Rev and Tax Committee meeting, and mostly we did a review, and there were some projections about what the professionals think about futures of sales tax. It was actually fairly rosy, that projection. And then we also authorized the staff to look at a situation when a city like Paradise has an emergency and a lot of the community has moved away because their houses have been burned. during the census, which establishes so many of the rules and distributions of not only elections and things like that, but also federal money. They want to make sure that the cities that were affected by a disaster don't get doubly burned, as it were. I attended the closing of the exhibit at the Bedford, the beautiful mess, and it was a delight. I am a person who likes to work with textiles, and it was fascinating to me. The good news about that is it is moving on as a touring exhibit, and it's got a whole thing. And actually, I believe that means Walnut Creek gets a little finder's fee for putting it together. I voted for, and I'm not giving the winner away, I'm voting for the Community Development Award for Ruth Putnam for the League of Cities again. And I went to TransPAC, where we approved the TransPAC budget. We approved the work plan for the coming year, and we approved, and this is the part that really affects most of our, some of our community. We approved to fully support and pay for the funds for the disabled and senior transportation systems. In order to meet their requests, we had to go into our reserve fund, but we're hoping sales tax comes back fat and sassy, and that we don't have to go into our reserve fund that deeply. And that's the end.
Thank you. I like a sales tax fund that's fat and sassy. Councilmember Darling.
Thank you. Just a couple things to talk about. First, we'll talk about water and heat because those are top of mind to everybody. The League of California Cities had Resources Secretary Wade Crowfoot talk about water in California, and he emphasized the state continuing to muddle its way through. And then we had a smaller group of the local water districts with the East Bay Division of League of California Cities, and that's where water problems have been getting solved in California. They talked about their regional efforts, and as somebody who's worked in water for a long time, the degree of cooperation amongst the water districts, particularly in the East Bay, but throughout the Bay Area, is far higher than I've seen it in years, and that was good. We did hear from both East Bay Mud and Contra Costa, our water suppliers, that they're in good shape. East Bay Mud will be using their Freeport project this year, and Contra Costa will be relying on their Los Vaqueros Reservoir. And I'm going to channel my inner Luella here. Both East Bay Mud and Contra Costa Water District have new rebates this year. There are online systems that you get a valve where the water comes into your house. And then you can see on your phone how much water you're using in real time. And you can get money from both of the districts for those devices on your house. And because it's a win-win, if you're away from home and you have a major water pipe burst, it will shut it off. And so your insurance company will give you a discount on your homeowner's insurance. So East Bay Mud and Contra Costa Water District's websites have the information on those rebates. Matt, I'm looking at you. You got your e-bike. Now you got to get your e-meter thing going. On heat, and MCE's just sent out a request that we all conserve Wednesday and Thursday this week between 4 and 9. With the heat coming in, they're saying their system is going to be stretched, and that's what once the sun goes down that we start to have the problem. So they're asking us all to conserve over the next couple of days. So that's the heat and the water. Now I'll go on to the happy stuff. I helped judge the car show, or I didn't judge the car show. I just made sure Kevin and all the other judges knew what they were doing at the car show at the Historical Society. And it was quite a good event. It was really fun to be able to get out and see people that I hadn't seen in so long, and that was great. But then even greater than that, I got to represent the city council at my first Eagle Court of Honor, and it was with my son's old Troop 202 that I was the committee chair for years. And the three boys, Nikhil, Raj, and Graham, who were getting their Eagles, got them during COVID. I mean, how do you even do an Eagle project during COVID? But those three boys, you know, when they started with the troop, they were the little loose screws running around on the floor, and we thought, oh my God, what are we ever going to do with these three? They had so much energy, and it was really great to see the three of them all manage. I think Graham ended up, he he got a little extension over his 18th birthday, but all three of them did a great job. And it was really fun to actually go back as a city council person and not just a Troop 202 parent and recognize them. So that's my report.
Thank you, Cindy. Councilmember Silva.
Can I ask Councilmember Darling a question on have either of the water agencies indicated any drought restrictions that would be facing our area?
They haven't, to the best of my understanding, at the East Bay Leadership Water Task Force this morning, we were talking about that. I don't think they're calling for mandatory restrictions. I think they're still asking us voluntarily to decrease our water use. So it's voluntary, not mandatory at this time.
Thank you.
Councilmember Silva.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Just to build on the comments regarding the presentation by Wade Crowfoot, the State Resources Director for California. He's an impressive speaker. He is the first speaker in a new series that Cal Cities is offering of a speakers program, and so stay tuned. But just, I thought one piece of information he offered during his presentation, when someone asked a question, why are we building more housing when we don't have enough water? And his answer was very clear. We have a housing problem, but we also need to recognize that 80% of the water in this state is actually used for agriculture. The 20% that is used for commercial and people has been reduced over time. And the statistic I believe he used was in the water crisis of the, I'm going to say 1977 probably, because I was in LA at the time. Southern California since then has maintained their level of water usage, but their population has increased by 2/3 more. So significant increase, and people have conserved. So conservation does work, and that's why we do it.
And the
That's why
same
I
is-
say that to my husband every time he's washing his hands. You can turn the water off while you're soaping to 20, and then turn the water on to rinse.
And the same thing is true in the Bay Area. The Bay Area districts have managed to keep, in spite of all the growth, keep water demand relatively level. It's pretty amazing.
Other items, maybe some of us noticed the announcement, registration for the Cal Cities Annual Conference, which is September 22nd to 24th, open today. So you'll want to get on board for that. Hotels tend to go fast if you're planning on going to Sacramento. The other thing is this will mean we'll be selecting our delegates for the General Assembly, which is, of course, now in September this year. We'll need to keep that on the radar for early August, that meeting. And also, if there are general resolutions that are coming to the General Assembly, they're due July 24th, but may not get all the way to our cities for the August meeting. So we'll have to keep an open slot for discussion in the first meeting of September. Along with a number of my other colleagues, we attended both the annual galas last Friday night for both Ruth Grandcroft Garden and Trinity Center, and thank you to everyone who supports those organizations. I also, back on real business, it seems to have been the last 2 weeks has been about housing in my house. I am a member of the Statewide Housing Policy Committee, and when we met 2 weeks ago, we had a very robust discussion on a piece of legislation that actually hasn't even moved out of the Rules Committee at this point, so it's probably not moving for a while. It's a proposal to put a measure on the ballot that would ensure, basically, it would give cities, if approved, it would give cities the overriding authority above the state on land use and zoning. Now, the robust discussion involve things like, why would the legislature put that on the ballot? As well as what's the likelihood of the local municipalities of having any friends to help contribute to a campaign to support that. And at this point, Cal Cities, the Housing Committee is recommending to the board that we take a watch position at this point in order to just see how this plays out over time, because this would be proposed for the November 2022 ballot. I was a panelist on a housing webinar for the Institute of Local Government, which is an educational arm of both the Cal Cities and the County Association and the Special Districts Association. It was interesting. There were some interesting slides on the RENA process and the need for housing and where the decades of pent-up demand that's occurred and why. And those slides, I passed those on actually to community development because they were really clear to understand the problem. And I think I will leave it there and thank everybody for their hard work.
All right, thank you. And we have come to Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I had the pleasure of meeting with Bob Linscheid, who's the new president and CEO of the Walnut Creek Chamber. And we met for coffee at a delightful new restaurant, Brioche de Paris on Locust Street in Walnut Creek. I was impressed with Mr. Linscheid's background, both as a CSU trustee and with the San Francisco Chamber. And it was very clear to me that we have a lot of shared goals on economic development, rebound, and Downtown Next. I'm really excited about the partnership and working with Mr. Linscheid and the members of the board of the Chamber on fulfilling those goals for our downtown. I also coordinated with the mayor and city staff on a letter to the Measure X Advisory Committee, as the city manager referenced earlier. I think that's going to be important that we support the use of those funds for a mental health crisis response program so that anyone, anywhere, anytime can have access to mental health services in the county. And along with the mayor, I attended the memorial brick dedication by the Miles Hall Foundation at Lancaster Park on June 5th, and it was a really good outpouring from the neighborhood, and it was nice to see Lancaster Park really transformed into a gathering spot with benches and tables for Miles Hall, Andrew King, and Aisha Horley. There was also a space to dedicate bricks that members could do for relatives or friends that they had lost to mental illness, and I had a brick dedicated to my Uncle Rick. So I was happy to attend that and commune with the neighborhood there, and that is my report.
Thank you, Matt. And I had a few different meetings over the last few weeks. One was with the County Connection board, and I'm a director on the board of directors for County Connection. And specifically as it relates to the Route 4, which is our free shuttle downtown, it's trending upward, but I just wanted to give the community an idea that we're still well below the pandemic levels. To give an idea that we were at 27 people an hour prior to the pandemic that were taking the Route 4 free shuttle. Last May, it was 3 people per hour. We're now up to 8 people per hour, so we still have a ways to go, but we do feel that's going to be continuing to trend upward. I did want to mention that the County Board of Supervisors passed an ordinance just at the last meeting regarding a zero tolerance policy as it relates to fireworks. And there is now an effort so that any possession, manufacture, sale, or discharge of any fireworks is against the law. This amendment now allows law enforcement to determine the responsible parties by where the fireworks were discharged. Previously, the ordinance required law enforcement to actually physically see where the fireworks were being discharged in order to write a citation. We know that we are in an extreme drought, and this week is going to be very hot for the next few days, and we are in fire season for the next 5 months. There absolutely is no tolerance for fireworks, and I ask the community to just make sure that you and your family and children do not use fireworks of any sort. On that happy note, there was a League of Cities that, for the Environmental Quality Policy Committee, of which I sit on, we met on the most recent environmental bills that were being introduced through the houses. And a couple of note that the committee and League are supporting that would be of interest to our active environmental groups here are the Plastic Pollution Producer Responsibility Act, which would establish and the act would establish and prohibit producers of single-use disposable packaging or single-use disposable food serviceware products from offering for sale after January 1st, 2032, unless they're recyclable or compostable. And then there is another bill that the Environmental Quality Policy Committee is supporting, which is recycling batteries and battery-embedded products. And that would enact the Recycling and Fire Risk Reduction Act of 2021, which would require producers of battery products to establish a stewardship program for recycling the batteries and battery-embedded products moving forward. So the first one, the league supports in concept. There's some details still to be worked out. The next one, the league supports in its entirety. We, again, with the Mayor Pro Tem, did attend the Lancaster Park dedication. I had a brick that was dedicated to my late brother who suffered from mental illness. And really, that's what the park is meant to do with those bricks, is people that have suffered from mental illness. And it was a terrific turnout, Matt. Thank you, Cindy, for helping me judge the car show and telling me, that's not a Ford, that's a Mercedes. Appreciate that. The 1915 Model T Ford did win the Mayor's Choice Award on that. And I heard from the Trinity Center that the gala was a huge success, that they raised over $100,000. And now that COVID restrictions are allowing for it, Trinity Center are reinstating group substance user counseling, and members are really benefiting from it. So, and that's my report.
Mayor, can I add?
Yes.
With Trinity Center, there is the joint relationship with Loaves and Fishes, and many people don't know this, but the Loaves and Fishes lunch program, ordinary people that don't need the additional help of Trinity, can go in and buy a box lunch, and they're delicious. And so they're open for the public. So anybody who's looking for a lunch to buy, go to Trinity Center and get a box from Loaves and Fishes. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, next on the agenda item is the public hearing item entitled The Adoption of Fiscal Year 2022 and Fiscal Year 2023 Budget and Master Fee Schedule. And at this time, I invite the staff to provide the staff presentation.
Good evening, Mayor Wilk, Mayor Pro Tem Francois, and members of the council. Kirsten Lacasse, Administrative Services Director. Tonight, we're going to talk about the adoption of the fiscal year 22 and 23 operating budget, capital budget, and master fee schedule. Will you please have the PowerPoint? Thank you. And just before I get started, I want to take a quick moment to thank all of the department directors and their staff, as well as staff in administrative services, Katie Bruner and John Furtado, and the rest of the finance team who helped get us to where we are today. It was a collaborative effort, and it was a heavy lift, so I just wanted to thank everyone. Next slide, please. So tonight we'll be discussing the all funds operating budget, including general fund highlights. Then we'll discuss the American Rescue Plan Act and intended uses, and I will refer to this as ARPA throughout the remainder of the presentation. Then we will discuss the fiscal year 22 and 23 parking fund, Boundary Out Golf Course funds, and all other funds in the city's budget. And then we will walk through the highlights of the capital budget. And lastly, we will talk about the proposed changes to the master fee schedule. Next slide, please. So I just want to take a moment to walk through the budget development timeline and the amount of effort put in by both council and members of the Finance Committee to get us to where we are as well. So we first went to Finance Committee with the biennial budget, and as well as the capital budget funding allocation back on April 13th. And then on April 20th, we took that same information to City Council regarding the FY 22 and 23 budget overview. On May 5th, we went back to Finance Committee with a second look at the fiscal year 22 and 23 proposed operating budget and the master fee schedule. Our last meeting with all of you here at City Council on May 18th, we went through the fiscal year 22 and 23 proposed operating budget, as well as the final changes to the master fee schedule. And tonight, June 15th, we are here to adopt both the fiscal year 22 and 23 operating and capital budgets and the master fee schedule. Next slide, please. So this table shows a summary level of the proposed all funds budget. For fiscal year 22, total revenues are $132.68 million, and expenditures are 136.26 million. The general fund is balanced, and the cumulative total of all other funds shows a use of fund balance of 3.58 million. The other funds category consists of several funds that over time have accumulated fund balance with the intent of using it over multiple years. These funds receive restricted revenues and can only be programmed for specific purposes. So the use of fund balance is intentional and is not indicative of a deficit. In fiscal year 23, total revenues are 134.58 million and expenditures are 137.92 million. The general fund has a budgeted surplus of 1.13 million, and as in fiscal year 22, the other funds will use 4.77 million of fund balance. Next slide, please. This next chart shows only the general fund, which includes the revenue that we are receiving from ARPA. In fiscal year 22, the total revenue is 86.99 million, and the total expenditures are the same. In fiscal year 23, the total revenue is 92.95 million, and the expenditures are 91.52. In fiscal year 23, we have a budgeted surplus of 1.13 million after a contribution to reserves of approximately 300,000. Next slide, please. So the ARPA allocated 8.33 million to Walnut Creek. These funds can be used to offset revenue loss related to the pandemic, costs associated with COVID response, investments in infrastructure for water, sewer, and broadband, and premium pay for essential workers. The city must use or obligate these funds by December 31st of 2024. And as a reminder from our last meeting on May 18th, the city will use 4 million in the current fiscal year, 1.69 million in fiscal year 22, and 1.14 million in fiscal year 23. That would leave a remaining approximate balance of 1.5 million. Next slide, please. Next, I'll walk through the general fund highlights for the revenues, expenditures, and priority funding. Next slide. So an important thing to remember is that the city lost 22.4 million in general fund revenue related to the pandemic. In fiscal year 20, we lost 7.4 million in just 3 months. In fiscal year 21, our budgeted revenue loss is 10.1 million, and in fiscal year 22, 4.9 million. And this is just in the general fund. Next slide, please. So the recovery from these losses varies depending on the source of the revenue. In fiscal year 22 and 23 budget, we're anticipating continued growth in property taxes, which were not impacted by the pandemic restrictions. Our sales tax revenues will be back to fiscal year 19 levels by FY22. A transient occupancy tax is slower and won't likely see pre-pandemic levels until fiscal year 25. Community development will see slight growth in fiscal year 22 with stronger growth in the second year of the 2-year budget. Arts and recreation's recovery is driven by the health orders, and some areas may not see pre-pandemic levels until fiscal year 25. Lastly, the Leisure Center will likely reopen in fall of 2021. Next slide, please. On the expenditure side, we've increased personnel costs for MOU increases. We have increases to pension costs that are dictated by CalPERS. We have a net increase of 1.5 FTE over the 2 years, and police reimbursable overtime, which also has offsetting revenue. In our non-personnel category, there are increases to known costs like utility rates, for example, as well as contractual cost increases. Additionally, there are council funding recommendations from the May 18th council meeting for the general fund, as well as items funded by ARPA, which I will discuss in more detail next. Next slide, please. So back on May 18th, we talked about the general fund funded items that we were adding to the budget over the 2 years, and they total 1.55 million. It was the diversity, equity, and inclusion, which includes annual staff training, task force facilitation and recommendations, crisis intervention and response training, regional mobile crisis response, financial analyst of 1 FTE in fiscal year 23, and for the Sustainability Action Plan, $200,000 each of the 2 years. For the ARPA-funded items, we have $2.83 million over the 2 years. Part of that, approximately $440,000, covers lost revenue to balance fiscal year 22. We are also including contract increases for the crossing guards, as well as air filtration improvements at 7 city facilities. We are funding the Walnut Creek downtown request of approximately $31,000 for revenue loss also related to the pandemic. There's an increase in cost for the 12 extra library hours, as well as economic development and recovery, which includes 2 FTE. Lastly, we are funding the core homeless outreach program, a full team for both years for Walnut Creek. Next slide, please. So next I want to go through our reserves. So as you recall, the council authorized the use of reserves in both fiscal year 20 and 21 in order to balance the budget. Fortunately, we did not use reserves in fiscal year 20, and we are projecting we will do the same for fiscal year 21, so no use of reserves. The estimated reserve balance at the end of the current fiscal year is $45 million. Based on the balances and the city's reserve policy, we will not need to put any additional money into those reserves for fiscal year 22. However, in fiscal year 23, we will need to contribute approximately $300,000 per the city's policy. So we are projecting that the estimated balance at June 30th of 2023 will be $45.3 million. And just the non-pension portion of our reserves exceed GFOA's recommended reserve level of 17%. Next slide, please. Next, I'm going to go through some of our non-general fund funds. We're going to talk a little bit about parking, Boundary Oak Golf Course, and other city funds. Next slide, please. So in our parking fund, we will have approximately $50,000 surplus in fiscal year 22 and just over $500,000 surplus in fiscal year 23. The budget includes capital contribution of $350,000 each year. Additionally, cost increases for parking sensors and garage management are included, as well as restoring funding for downtown events. For Boundary Oak Golf Course, we are budgeting a $260,000 surplus in fiscal year 22 and a $340,000 surplus in fiscal year 23. This budget includes contract operations and city oversight, funding for non-routine maintenance projects, as well as loan payments. Our other funds, this includes internal service funds, special revenue funds, grant funds, among others, and there's a complete list of those in attachment 7 to the agenda report. Typically, these funds receive revenues that are restricted, as well as the programming to use those revenues. And where budgeted expenditures exceed budgeted revenues, accumulated fund balance will be used. Next slide, please. So the proposed net FTE change over the next 2-year budget is 1.5 FTE. The changes in fiscal year 22 represent 1.5 FTE reduction for 2 limited duration positions, which expire in FY21, and they're both currently vacant. The addition of 1 FTE in general government is an economic development project manager and will be funded through ARPA. The addition of 2 FTE in fiscal year 23 include a financial analyst in administrative services, as well as an office specialist in community development. The city's pre-pandemic FTE was 378, so we are still well below fiscal 19 staffing levels. Next slide, please. So for our fiscal year 22 and 23 capital budget, over the 2 years is $22.1 million. And it consists of the categories of roadway maintenance. There's a general fund allocation for asset management with a fix-it-first approach, building and facility asset management projects, parking garage maintenance and upkeep, pedestrian and bike improvements, transportation infrastructure projects, and park and open space improvements. And these are all funded over multiple funding sources, some of which are gas tax, general fund, Measure J, and the parking fund. Next slide, please. So overall, in our master fee schedule, we are updating fee ranges to reflect increasing costs, maintaining cost recovery goals, and to reflect changing conditions in the market. Additionally, the fiscal year 23 fees were increased by 2.7% as applicable per the council direction from our last meeting. Next slide, please. So what we're asking of you this evening is to adopt the resolution appropriating an operating budget of expenditures for the period of July 1, 2021 to June 30, 2023, and adopt the resolution appropriating a capital budget of expenditures for the period of July 1, 2021 to June 30, 2023, and adopt the resolution adjusting fees and charges for various municipal services and activities. Next slide, please. And that concludes the presentation, and we are available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Let me just quickly check with council. It's almost 7:30. Is everybody okay? This will be long. Okay, great. Let's start with questions then. And who would like to start? Councilmember Haskew.
I think I have a simple question. At the end of the ARPA money, we have $1.5 million of extra money. As I remember, would you please confirm that that must be spent on ARPA-approved expenditures by a certain date?
Yes, it must be approved. I'm sorry, it must be spent or obligated by December 31st of 2024.
Okay, which is the next year.
Yes, 3 years out. We have 3 years to spend.
Okay, all right. And we're using that as sort of an a reserve fund just in case things don't come as exactly we hope they will?
Yes, we would need to come back to council in order to program those fundings, but those funds, but right now, yes, they would sit in reserve.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to clear up.
Councilmember Darling?
I think I have two simple questions, I hope. For FY22, it sounds like you're not recommending that we add to our reserve, even if we end up at the end of the year with the capacity to do that. What is, and you said that's based on our policy. I just wanted to understand that a little bit better.
Well, based on the policy, if we calculate what our reserve levels need to be when we start the budget year, but then if there's a surplus at the end of the year, then the decision could be made with your recommendation to fund reserves more. But right now, based on the policy, our reserve levels are high enough that we don't need to put any funding in advance.
And because we're basically not running a surplus, you're not recommending putting it in, but we could look at that later and decide if we wanted to do that.
Yes.
Okay, and then Luella covered the 1.5 million left over on ARPA, but I was curious, so ARPA is going to be funding the economic development position. How is that going to work? Are we going to be able to make it a limited term position, or are we looking to keep that position running longer?
That's actually intended to be a permanent position. So after the 2 years of ARPA funding, it would actually then become an obligation of the general fund.
And the hope is that the general fund will have recovered enough due to the economic development person that we can continue to support the economic development person.
Yes, and hoping that the economy does well, we'll have continued increases on our revenue streams.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
If I could just expound upon that briefly, typically we do not recommend the use of one-time funds for ongoing costs, and that's something this council and city has been very good about. ARPA, however, is intended for this exact type of situation in which we have depressed revenues for likely a shorter period of time that are expected to rebound. And as noted, we're projecting a little over $1 million surplus in year 2 of this budget that would be used and could be used to help fund this position. So the idea truly is that ARPA in this case is being used as a bridge for this 1 year, maybe 2 years, and then it would be self-sustaining beyond that.
Councilmember Silva?
Thank you. Picking up, though, we don't usually use surpluses to fund ongoing positions. What are some of the things that we have used surpluses in recent years for, particularly since some of us are newer and may not have noticed that we were not adding people to the payroll with one-time money?
Yeah, and then just to clarify the time frame, so our books will close for the current fiscal year, June 30th. And then Kirsten and her team are very busy doing the accounting side of the shop as opposed to the budget side of the shop and looking to close the books, working with our auditors. So usually by mid to late fall, we'll know precisely what that amount is. This year, we're projecting a surplus. It's just a matter of how much it would be. To answer your question, Councilmember Silva, typically these have been used to fund some one-time programs, some infrastructure as an example. Some funds were used to help with the public plaza on Cypress and Main, also used to help fund the expansion of the Lesher Plaza. And there are numerous other, some downtown enhancement funds were used a number of years ago, I believe. That may have been general fund, may have been parking, but you get the idea that it's generally infrastructure, one-time program or service as opposed to ongoing.
Thank you. A few other questions, and thank you and your team for all of this work. I know to do it every year and in this kind of situation and the crisis has been arduous, and that's the best word I can think of. I'm glad we're able to have the funds for the additional library hours, but to clarify, the Ignacio Library will not actually probably open to the public use as a library until October 1st. Are we going to be able to not pay for library hours during that period of time?
Yes, that's correct.
Sorry. And I sent you this question, but Dan sent me a response. We do have designated vehicle impact fees that we receive from the garbage hauler. And where are those funds kept? Because they have a precise purpose and they can't just float into the Arts and Recreation Department. I think they have to go into Public Works for roads. But where are they and how are we tracking those?
So those fees are currently in the general fund, but they are programmed specifically for the purpose intended. And right now, my understanding is that our costs are higher than the amount we collect. So we are well within the guidelines.
So these are not being used for capital projects, but we have a couple $1 million a year that we put in just for pothole repair and other things. Glad to get nods. For the record, that is yeses coming from the audience. And I did send you a question where there were some changes since the May 18th meeting to estimated where the revenues were coming in and what department revenues, department expenses, were those all related to the application of the expenses from these special programs that we agreed to?
Yes, that was, and specifically the ARPA items, those were budgeted in the departments that were most appropriate for each of those functions. And so the numbers you will see have changed from the May 18th for that purpose.
And my last basic question here, I saw a comment somewhere that from a member of the public that they didn't see where the crisis response, mental health response program was in the budget. That must be in general government. And it is there.
Yes, it is in general government.
$150,000 per year.
Yes.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois.
None at this time, thank you.
No questions. Kirsten, thank you very much for the report and obviously very thorough. So we'll open it up now to public comments. And I invite any member of the public that would wish to make comments at this time to please raise your hand on your Zoom feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio if you'd like to provide a public comment. For those who desire to provide public comments on this public hearing, please raise your hand now. As a reminder, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make their oral remarks. The Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. Written comments submitted have been and will during this item be posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record but will not separately be read into the record. Also, please note that during public hearings and consideration items, group spokespersons are allotted 10 minutes in lieu of other members of the group speaking on the item. We trust that everyone will follow the rules, and at this time, I'll ask the city clerk if there are any members of the public who would like to provide comments.
Mayor, I don't see any members of the public who wish to provide comment.
All right, then we will bring it back to council. We'll close the public comments on that, and council for any council comments. And why don't we go in the same order that we have the questions? So we'll start with Councilmember Haskew.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question. We have 3 items that we have been requested to address. Do we want to do them as a being one, or do we want to break them up? And shall we do that? I recommend that. So, yes.
Like to speak to them at one at a time?
One at a time,
Okay.
and we make a vote one at a time. May we have the slide, whoever is in charge of the slide that has the things that we have to, oh, I suppose it's in our.
Are you going to start with the fees, since if we don't approve the fees, the operating budget will be cattywampus?
Oh, I like that. I don't like I don't like the result. I like the use of the word cattywampus. Yeah. Do we know what slide page it is?
For the master fee schedule, it is slide 17.
Yeah, we want,
Oh, I apologize. Slide 18.
slide 18. There we go. Okay, so we're starting from the bottom and we're working our way up. First of all, I want to thank you very much for following through on my request that the second year be adjusted a little bit, so it makes more sense. I am totally okay with the item, and I will move to adopt the resolution adjusting the fees and changes for various municipal services and activities.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. City Clerk, could you please call the roll on this item?
Councilmember Haskew,
Yay.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois,
Aye.
Councilmember Darling,
Aye.
Councilmember Silva,
Aye.
Mayor Wilk.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. Okay, so the second one, I guess you're going to do the middle for
Okay.
the capital budget?
I didn't realize I was first for everything. Okay.
Oh, we don't have to be.
No, I'm fine. I can read.
I'll take the capital budget, because I have one comment I would like to make.
Oh, well, then would you please, and then I'll second it.
Oh, well, we will pass the baton over to Councilmember Silva.
So hopefully Public Works staff, first of all, thank you to Public Works staff for all the work on the capital budget and for the activity today and yesterday to reconcile some minor discrepancies that were just more frustrating than anything, I'm sure, for all of them. The one thing I appreciated was bringing back the all-weather ball field potential project into the budget, but I think, and I spoke with the city engineer today, that I was a bit concerned that it just kind of landed in a year without any actual strategic thought as to when it might occur and what the best strategy would be. And so I would like to ask staff as part of this that they just come back to us, maybe even at the same time that they talk to us about Your Parks, Your Future, and just tell us what this would be, what it could cost, and how best to implement it, because maybe these are on a parallel track with Your Parks, Your Future, particularly since the funding is a very large number, and we shouldn't be pretending that we're going to do one in one way and one in another. Maybe it's going to take. So if my colleagues would agree with that, maybe we can just, I'll be happy to make the motion for the capital budget.
Do we nod?
I agree.
Nodding heads? All right. Why don't you
So
make that
I move
motion
to
then?
adopt the resolution appropriating a capital budget of expenditures for the period of July 1, 2021 to June 30th, 2023, with the note that we would like to hear a little more elaboration on the all-weather ball field.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. City Clerk, can you please take the roll?
Councilmember Silva,
Aye.
Councilmember Haskew,
Aye.
Councilmember Darling,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois,
Aye.
Mayor Wilk.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, so for the operating budget, I'm going to actually start the comments with Mayor Pro Tem Francois, who is on the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to ask staff first a question, and this was raised, I believe, by Councilmember Silva at a prior meeting, and then the Walnut Creek excuse me, Walnut Creek Library Foundation President Kathy Hicks raised a question too in terms of extra library hours and what on the surface looks like a differential in cost between what Walnut Creek is being charged and what some other comparably sized libraries pay.
I can speak to that one if you'd like.
Please.
Unless,
Thank you.
And if Heather Ballinger is on Zoom, I'd ask we bring her in as well. So yes, there has been additional discussion and meetings with the library related to the charging of rates to the various libraries. There was an update that was provided that shows the cost per square foot, and there is considerable variation throughout the county amongst various libraries. The easier one to explain based upon the information we received is, the Walnut Creek Downtown Library has one of the more expensive cost per square feet ratios. It's the largest library by far in the entire system, and it has 2 levels, has 3 information desks, so there is considerable amount more staffing there. The one that came in more to question was the Ignacio Valley Library, and comparing with some comparable sizes in Orinda and more specifically Lafayette, where our cost per square foot is a fair bit higher. Some of the explanations are that there's some variation in terms of the level of staff that are there, and let me give an example. So because Ignacio Valley Library is currently closed, there are no specific staff that are assigned to that library, and it's been closed because it's a testing center for COVID. So they assumed a middle rate, meaning there are lower entry employees, higher entry employees, some who accept healthcare benefits, some who waive those if they maybe have a partner or spouse who has benefits, that sort of thing. So they assume middle of the road. 1 or 2 of the other facilities, I believe they do have some staff there that are lower in the pay scale and who may have waived some healthcare benefits, and so their cost per employee is a bit lower, and that averages out. That said, based upon this, I'm not convinced that explains the whole differential. No. So there will be some additional discussion, and I equate this, it's kind of strange. So they do charge actual costs. So they give us an estimate, but they will only bill us for the actual costs incurred. So this is the maximum amount they would charge us. Obviously, with Ignacio Valley being closed likely until September, October, until the testing site's done and additional capital upgrades are made, we won't be charged anything. And then we will be charged the actual cost. The way that the county does this, it is somewhat common in government to charge actual costs. However, I think it's a bit odd because it's the equivalent of if you go to a grocery store and you and a friend are in different checkout lines and you both buy the same loaf of bread, one gets charged, 10% more because they went to the more experienced checkout cashier as opposed to the less experienced one who's paid a different rate. So I do think there's some opportunity. That said, the new librarian, Alice McKee, has been very forthcoming and has been very good to work with thus far, and brought forth the information related to increasing the amount of hours from 35 hours per week that's on the county's dime to 40 after she reviewed staffing models and figured they could increase open hours at no additional cost to anyone, which was nice. And so she has committed to continuing to review this information, look for more possibly consistent ways to charge throughout the library system, is reviewing that. So we fully anticipate that Heather Ballinger and some of our other staff will continue to have discussion with the county librarian in the coming months to further pinpoint some of those variances in costs by library branch.
I appreciate the response. I know we on the council got a memo on that, and I wanted to make sure the public had that information as well, and I appreciate the diligence that you went through to obtain it. So what we got is an estimate, and the actual cost will likely be lower than that. We'll know when we get the actual bill, depending on the services. So coming back to the operating budget, I want to thank the city manager, the finance department for all their hard work. When you laid it out there in terms of the $22 million deficit we were facing over a very short period of time, and how I'm very proud of this city and our staff for being proactive and making the hard decisions, and I'll include this council among the folks that were involved in that. And with the general member of the public wouldn't have noticed an appreciable reduction in services. The things kind of went along as normal, but we had to do a lot of hard work to close that gap, and we did it. And as a result, now we're potentially facing a surplus of this fiscal year and even in fiscal year 23. So I'm very pleased with that result. I'm very pleased with the direction that we as a staff are going and as a council are going, and keeping the staff levels at a manageable level and trying to keep costs in check. And so with that, I would be pleased to make the motion to adopt the resolution adopting the fiscal year 22 and 23 operating budget.
And I'd be willing to second that.
So I have a couple of,
Yeah, I thought you might. Okay, so.
so I need to go back to the library hours because I just want to make a point. I think your analogy of the grocery clerk line is very good, but it probably means a loaf of bread would be 2 cents difference between the two lines. This is not 2 cents. This is significant. And I don't think the policy that they're using to price would be acceptable in any sector. Because if the public understood this, they'd go, well, I want the staff that's in Orinda who is costing 60% of what the staff in Walnut at the Ignacio Library is costing. Because, so I think we have to push hard because this is real money. And I appreciate what staff has already done because we're not going to find a lot of friends in some of our other communities. Even though they showed me the information, they said, yeah, but we don't want your price, we want our price. So, but we're all in this together. And the county, the cities in this county came together 30 years ago to create this library coalition that got these extra hours and options. This is not a time to blow up the coalition by virtue of having a pricing model. That just doesn't seem fair. My other comment is a question. TOT is expected to not recover for another 4 years. So at one point in the last 18 months, we had asked for an estimate of collection of short-term rentals paying TOT. Perhaps this is the time to actually look at that, since the estimate is that there could be as many as 200 short-term rentals in the community that we should be collecting from. And so if my colleagues would agree, I would hope that you're getting some nods, we look at that as potentially a source. It's also good to know where they are, because then they're more responsible actors in terms of these rentals. And I'll be supporting the motion on the operating budget. Thank you.
Thank you. And if there's no further comments right now, let's take a roll that we have a motion and a second.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois.
Aye.
Councilmember Darling.
Aye.
Councilmember Haskew.
Aye.
Councilmember Silva.
Aye.
Mayor Wilk.
And I'll be voting aye, and I just want to again thank you very much. There's been a lot of work. I've only been on the city council for 5 years, and we typically see the budget come up every couple of years. Not only is this like every year for the last couple of years, but in the middle of a financial cliff that none of us could have even imagined experiencing, and we have come out looking okay on this, and with bright hopes towards the future, and having to tighten our belt a bit, but being able to continue to provide services that the public really wants, and being able to see what we can do to continue to enhance. Thank you very much to you and the entire team. Thank you, Katie, as well, and to John, wherever you may be. Yes, aye. So the budget passes. Why don't we take a 5-minute break just so that we can stretch our legs, come back, and we'll handle the last item on the regular meeting agenda. And we're back. And it looks like we've got Andy Smith from staff in front of us. The item on the agenda, the consideration item is titled 2023 to 2031 Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And at this time, I invite the staff to provide the staff presentation. Andy, it's good to see you.
Thank you, Mayor Wilk and fellow council members. It's good to be here. This is the first time in, I guess, a year and a half since I last presented to you when I was wearing something other than elastic waistband shorts. So this is a good thing.
And thank you for that.
Yes.
TMI.
I have to start with a little bit of humor because this is a very technical subject that hopefully I will be able to keep you awake through this as I go through. Yes, we are talking about the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation for the upcoming housing element cycle. Let me just go ahead and dive right in. Okay, we're trying something new here where I'm actually running off of the laptop in front of me. Otherwise, every other word I say would be next. This is basically kind of the first step of our update to our housing element. The housing element is one of the required elements of our general plan, and it has to be updated every 8 years, unlike the rest of our general plan where there actually is no set schedule in state law. And as an example, our current general plan, which was adopted in 2006, has a horizon of 2025. And so we've typically have done kind of 20-year general plans, and that's normal. But again, there's no state mandate. Housing element is different. The housing element has to be updated every 8 years. And at its core, basically, it's a policy document that demonstrates the city's ability to accommodate its share of the regional housing need. So what is the regional housing need? Well, that starts with the RHND, which does not have a nice-sounding acronym to it, or it is an acronym, but I can't say it nicely. It's the Regional Housing Needs Determination. This is a number that actually comes from the state. It's calculated by the California Department of Housing and Community Development. It covers the 8-year housing cycle for the entire region. Each of the regions in the state, and I honestly forget how many there are, but each region, they're on a staggered schedule, but each region does its own 8-year update. As an example, Southern California area, they're about 2 years ahead of us, schedule-wise. And so for the upcoming 8 years for us, it's 2023 through 2031. And the state basically gives, based on criteria in state law, a region-wide number, which is then further divided by affordability levels. So, very low, low, moderate, and above moderate income levels in terms of how many dwelling units need to be produced within the region in order to meet the region's need. And again, it applies to the entire Bay Area in this case. Now, the calculation that the state uses to come up with this regional determination has been impacted by recent state legislation, and this upcoming cycle is a much larger number than in previous years. And this is, I'm sure you've all heard this before reading the staff report. It has, of course, drawn a fair bit of attention. So the question is, well, why? Why is this number so large now? Again, I did mention changes in state law, but the reason for those changes in state law really have to do with the fact that the state and the region, these are actually Bay Area numbers here, have not been keeping up with our housing needs. As you can see here, for example, in the last decade, only one new dwelling unit was built in the Bay Area for every a little more than 4.5 new residents coming to the Bay Area. Obviously, it's no secret that we're in a housing crisis. There's not enough housing, and it's very, very expensive. And so this is really the reason behind the changes in the state legislation, which changed the calculation, which then increased our region's number. And what is that regional number? Well, it's 441,176 new homes to be produced, or at least planned to be produced within the upcoming 8-year cycle. So the first step that occurs at the region level, once we've got this number from the state, is that the region, through ABAG, Association of Area of Governments, creates a distribution methodology. And there's, of course, a committee associated with this made up of elected officials and staff members from across the Bay Area. And they create what is illustrated here as kind of the mysterious black box that is used to distribute the regional determination to the 101 cities and the 9 counties for their unincorporated areas. And they can't just willy-nilly come up with a methodology however they see fit. There are criteria and statutory requirements in state law that they have to follow relating to fair housing, equity, jobs housing balance, and a number of environmental goals, particularly related to greenhouse gas reductions. And to that end, the distribution methodology created at the regional level has to be consistent with our regional greenhouse gas reduction land use plan, which in the Bay Area is known as Plan Bay Area. This is, I want to say the first generation plan was almost 10 years ago, and they're working on the second generation update at the moment. So Plan Bay Area 2040 now becoming Plan Bay Area 2050. So the distribution methodology that was created by the committee and adopted by ABAG, the proportional distribution across the cities and counties in the Bay Area is first based on Plan Bay Area itself. And so what that basically means is Plan Bay Area has some population targets, if you will, and ABAG has taken those jurisdiction by jurisdiction level growth assumptions and figured, okay, this city is assumed to have X percentage of the total regional growth. Walnut Creek is, some fraction of a percent. I forget the exact number. That's then used as the ratio, essentially, how to divvy up the state number, which is a real number, that 441,000, to the cities and counties. That's the first step in the methodology. Then ABAG, and this is as required by state law, the methodology places added emphasis on equity, particularly with regard to what have been identified as high opportunity areas. And these essentially are census tracts that have low levels of poverty and pollution, high levels of education and employment, and good schools. In other words, Walnut Creek, among others, of course. There's also an added emphasis on access to jobs, both by transit and by automobile. And of course, Walnut Creek scores well there as well. And so what they came up with is this methodology that is illustrated here. And I'll be honest with you, every time I look at this graphic, I have to remember what it's trying to say. This is trying to bring in a rather complex calculation. And essentially, what they've done is for the lower income housing needs, so for very low and low income housing for very low and low income households, the factors used to essentially divvy up the homes at those affordability levels, they're weighted on access to high opportunity areas. There's a 70% weighting on that, and then a 15% weighting on each on job proximity by auto and job proximity by transit. And then for the moderate and above moderate household income units, they are weighted just by access to high opportunity areas, and then 60% job proximity via automobile. So, like I said, we get this 441,000 number from the state. The state also tells us that that is broken up into the 4 subcategories of income level, which you can see at the top of the graph, so 114,442 very low income units as an example. And then those numbers are then, I apologize for this, trying to explain this stuff. Those are then divvied up again based on access to high opportunity areas, jobs, etc., such that there are 120, for example, in this green column, there's 126,000 plus units of very low and low income units that should be allocated to jurisdictions with access to high opportunity areas. And so that is essentially, this is a region-wide number, 126,000 very low and low income units associated with high access to high opportunity areas. And then that is multiplied by the jurisdiction's score, a weighting factor that ranges from 0.5 to 1.5, based on each individual jurisdiction's actual access to high opportunity areas. And then that is times by, or multiplied by, the city's proportion of the region-wide growth as anticipated by Plan Bay Area. And then that is where the baseline allocation for each of these affordability levels comes to for the city. And then there's another calculation or an adjustment, an equity adjustment, where essentially it is meant to correct for areas or within the Bay Area where there are high levels of racial or economic exclusion. And so basically, essentially segregation. In the case of Walnut Creek, we're almost not impacted because we kind of fall right in the median in the middle of all those ranking factors. So it might be in some ways easier to just think of that mysterious black box that I had a few slides prior, but if you really want to get into the details, here they are. And of course, we did go into a more coherent explanation in the staff report. So where are we with the distribution methodology? The final methodology was approved by ABAG in May, and then the draft allocations, so these are the actual draft numbers to each of the cities and counties, were released on May 25th. What are those numbers? Well, right here, of course, the big number at the end there, a total of 5,805 units have been allocated to Walnut Creek for the upcoming 8-year housing cycle. And you can see the breakdown by affordability level. And when you compare that to our current and previous cycles, you'll see that it is a much higher number. It's about a little shy of 2.5 times what our previous number was. And this, again, where we kind of follow the median of things, this increase, this about 2.5 times increase, is about the same as the increase to the region-wide number. So, Walnut Creek we're not an outlier in terms of how much we're being impacted by the increase in the regional allocation. And right now, we're going through an appeal period where cities and counties have 45 days, it runs through July 9th, to appeal to ABAG their draft allocation. However, state law is very strict as to what they can file an appeal for. Basically, it's just for these three reasons: either making a case that ABAG just didn't consider information that had been submitted by the jurisdiction. In particular, surveys sent out early on to cities and counties from ABAG. Walnut Creek was one of the 72 jurisdictions that did respond, and they did take into consideration our comments. We could also file appeals if we could make the case that ABAG is somehow not following their own methodology, which I don't believe is the case, or if there was some significant and unforeseen change in circumstances, when at least compared to the rest of the region. Obviously, the pandemic is a significant and unforeseen change in circumstances, but it has impacted everybody. So you can't really see a case to be made there. And in fact, it is worth noting that appeals are unlikely to be unsuccessful in our opinion. And as an example, if you look at the SCAG region, Southern California Association of Governments, that's their ABAG, there were a host of appeals filed, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50, as I recall. In fact, there were 2 or 3 more appeals than there were cities filing appeals. There were some cities that filed appeals on behalf of their neighbors because they didn't like their numbers either. And basically all those appeals were denied except for 2 for small amounts of units that represented only 0.2% of the units allocated within that entire region. I will note that my staff report says 2% rather than 0.2%. That was an error on my part, a typo. I misread my calculator. And it's worth noting that, appeals, it's a zero-sum game. So if somehow Walnut Creek were to file an appeal and win, well, then our allocation has to go to everybody else as well, and vice versa. And so for these reasons, we feel that appeals, whether if Walnut Creek were to be filing one or any other jurisdiction, unless there is, again, some really unusual situation, they're not likely to be successful. So I usually plow right through my presentations, but this is a really complex one, and I started obviously getting a little hung up on that graphic trying to explain the distribution methodology. So I'd like to pause for any questions you may have of what I've discussed thus far.
All right, we'll start with Mayor Pro Tem Francois.
So, Andy, thank you for pausing, and thank you for the detailed staff report. And I'm still struggling a little bit with the huge increase in numbers. And I'm going to try to, and I've read the report, and I know that you and I have exchanged emails on it. What you said in your presentation, I just want to make sure I understand this, is it that in prior housing cycles, the methodology didn't take into account the deficit in production that had occurred, and the current methodology takes that into account? Is that why the number went up by 2.5 times?
Not in the distribution methodology, not the methodology used to divvy up the Bay Area regions number, that 441,000.
Right.
In terms of the calculation at the state level for the regional determination as a whole, that total 441,000 number, I'll be honest with you, I would have to reread that portion of the state law. I'm not sure if that particular issue was a factor. But nothing that is being done at the local levels, you know, ABAG and the like, there's no punishment going on in that regard.
At a region-wide level, though, we were, over the past decades, we were supposed to be producing 4 times the amount of housing units that we were. That's correct?
I don't know if it was 4 times, but it was definitely more than were produced. And that was the case throughout most of the state. And that is a reason for the housing crisis that has been occurring, which was then the impetus for the state legislature to revise the state laws that govern the calculation of that regional determination.
Okay. And the number is a big number and probably shock a lot of people, but the number is used mostly for planning purposes. It's not a mandate that any agency produce that number of units, but the agency must plan for that number of units. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Cities are generally not in the business of actually building housing. I mean, of course, Walnut Creek has a very progressive housing program, and we do have some funding programs to assist in the construction of affordable housing done by private developers. But generally speaking, you know, cities don't build the actual housing. And at its core, the law is really about planning for that housing. I will say, and I'll be discussing this a little bit further on, that the state has increase the standards by which we have to be able to demonstrate that housing's likely to occur, not just that we have the zoning for it, but still it is just a planning tool.
Okay, and then the last question for now. You said that our increase of 2.5 times was similar to the region-wide increase. How does it compare to comparable cities in Contra Costa, Lafayette or Pleasant Hill, Danville? Did theirs also increase by 2.5 times?
No, although I wouldn't say that those cities are all quite as comparable. We do have, 2 BART stations. We are a regional center. We have a lot of jobs here. There's actually twice as many jobs in Walnut Creek as there are employed residents. And so those are all factors that resulted in our number being a little bit higher. And it's really just reflecting the fact that we're a regional center as opposed to, say, Clayton, where those things don't occur and you might not want to put quite as much housing growth in that area.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick one. Thank you, Andy. This is a complex subject, and I really appreciate the detail you put into it. So the Bay Area as a whole is 441,000 units this cycle. Do you know what it was last cycle?
Divided by 2.5. I forget the exact number. I kind of want to say it was 189,000 and change, but I would have to double check.
Yeah, so it basically, our number went up proportionate to the Bay Area as a whole.
Our number, in general, yes, happened to be. It's curious that through so many of these things, the weighting factors, the equity adjustment, and even just our overall growth in the number of units, we tend to kind of match the regional average as a whole.
Okay, so it's not anybody necessarily picking on us. It's more a matter of they're asking for much more of the Bay Area. And
yes.
We get,
First and foremost, the reason why the number has gone up, and in fact, I would say almost entirely the number has gone up so significantly is just because the region-wide number has gone up. When you get down to the fine-grained detail, some cities saw a lower percentage of a growth than in their numbers than did, say, Walnut Creek. But again, it's, for the reasons I explained, and using Clayton as an example.
Thank you.
The only question I can think of is, do we get any credit at all for what we've accomplished? Because I am told we are a state level standard for building things like low income housing, and yet we still have to bear a burden that seems unmerciful.
So as far as getting credit, in terms of how, directly impacting the number that we are receiving, I would say that there's no direct linkage there, but speaking broadly, Walnut Creek gets credit all the time for that. I can say that it makes my job as a city planner for the city much easier at the regional level. We kind of punch above our weight class, if you will, and frankly, the regional agencies really listen to us because they know we're not just complaining about everything. I mean, we walk the walk as well as talking the talk. And so, if we raise an issue that, hey, this doesn't quite make sense, they look into that.
I'm going to go to Councilmember Silva in a second, but I have something that just kind of bridges onto this. So I'm going to use that to tee me up, which is, so if we meet our RENA numbers, does that absolve us from state bills that have signed a law then mandating housing growth throughout cities, regardless of how well we're doing in meeting those numbers?
It doesn't absolve us, but it definitely makes things easier. There are certain laws on the books that basically grant various waivers to local zoning and other things that come into place sooner for cities that aren't meeting their numbers, or at least doing as good of a job as cities that are. So for example, and actually Margaret Ornst, who I believe is in the Zoom, she's our housing program manager. I believe she's on here as well and could explain it better than I could. But it's either SB 35 or SB 330, I forget which, but there are some state laws that, for example, if a project comes in with a certain percentage of affordable units and the city hasn't done a very good job with its housing production, that the percentage of affordability in an individual development is low. It can be lower. I'm saying this backwards. There are exemptions to local zoning that come into play if the developer provides a lower amount of affordability, if the city is not doing so good on its production when compared to a city that is doing good on its production, the developer would have to provide a higher level of affordability on their development in order to qualify for various exemptions.
Thank you.
And I see Margot on the screen there, actually, if she'd like to correct me.
Margot, is there anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that what Andy said is correct. I can just say it another way, which is that, we typically have met our above moderate RENA, and that is good in terms of when you're subject to streamlining. So because we're usually on target with our above moderate, we've not been subject to streamlining through SB 35 on projects that are only 10% affordable, but we are subject to SB 35 streamlining for projects that are 100% affordable, or essentially over 50% affordable, because we haven't met our affordable categories. And that would continue to be true in the next cycle if we stay at that same trend.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Silva, you're batting cleanup.
So let's see if I can confirm what we've heard. Step one was for the state, the Housing and Community Development Department, to determine a big number in the millions of units, which then were allocated to the various COGs and individual entities across the state.
Yes.
This number was really, really big for a couple of reasons. The state legislature got into the middle of it, I think it's 2017, and drafted a bill. The number escapes me now, but basically changed how the formula was, basically how the numbers were calculated, and they put it into state law.
Yes.
And so HCD didn't invent this number, and they didn't throw a dart at the wall. They used the calculation and the assumptions of growth that was basically coming from the COGS as well as the Department of Finance, which basically gives us our growth indicators because they're watching who's paying their tax bills, I guess. That's my best calculation of how they do that. So that number is baked by housing and community development. And for us, that's 441,176 units here in the 9-county Bay Area.
That is correct.
So then the ABAG, which is our regional cog here, had the job to figure out how to assign 441,176 units for the next 8 years across all of these cities, towns, and counties.
Correct.
You call it a black box, but there's the Housing Methodology Committee, which was comprised of elected officials, planners, and this round, for the first time, there were 12 people who were neither. They were stakeholders, nonprofits, housing advocates, the development community. So they had a big say in how the black box was going to work.
Correct.
Okay, so far, so good. So the next step was for them to basically build that box, which is multiple colors and how we're going to calculate. But having watched both a ABAG meeting on Friday and then a workshop last night about Plan Bay Area, it is very clear that this is about equity and basically putting the affordable units in communities with exclusionary zoning. And they use those terms. They're not subtle. Would you?
The term exclusionary zoning has definitely been used as part of the Plan Bay Area update, and of course that has fed into the
whole thing.
Yeah.
So we're sitting here with, there will be, while we're sitting at the 2.5 times, we landed dead in the middle, is what you said, and we did it for multiple ways. There are communities that are getting more than 2.5 times, and they're getting a lot of it because these are communities where they've got good schools. They may or may not have jobs, but they're high opportunity areas. And then there are communities, Richmond has lost units in this process, and they're zoned for it, they're planned for it. And Tom Butt, the mayor of Richmond, said today, we'll take your units if you want to give them to us, but we don't think they're going to let us trade units out. But, and that's simply because of the demographics. So my ABAG has approved its methodology, the black box, on May 20th. So we cannot appeal the methodology, and we can't appeal the number that came from HCD.
Correct.
So I really want to ask a little more clarification on the 3 points under which we could appeal. Missing information. Give me an example of missing information, like we had a whole census tract of low-income people that didn't get into the mix.
Or perhaps erroneous information. I remember when Plan Bay Area 2040 was being formulated, some of the growth projections in there were based on some faulty data that I then corrected with Edit ABAG.
Have you identified any faulty information
No, I
or
have
missing
not.
information?
No, I have not.
All right. ABAG didn't use the black box the way it invented the black box would be my translation of item 2. Any evidence that I mean, this is, I've heard this is easier to follow this time than it was 8 years ago, as long as you can track, because there were tables showing
Yes.
how our numbers laid out and et cetera. Is there any reason to believe they didn't follow their methodology?
No, and actually to that I can say that I asked for the actual Excel spreadsheets from ABAG staff and went through them myself, and there's no monkey business, to use a technical term.
And so other than a worldwide pandemic, which is redundant, we haven't had a forest fire that took out half of the community. That's the only thing I can think of that's an unforeseen, or an earthquake that basically shook the place to death the way they had in Ridgecrest 2 years ago.
Yes. Yeah, that exactly. I think that's what that was intended to cover, you know, the paradises of the world, for example.
All right. So based on what happened at SCAG, which was, they had 1.35 million units, 3,100, I was just reading your staff report again today, 3,100 were changed for 2 agencies. That's 0.2%. If you take 441,000 and you do it by 0.2%, it comes out to about 900 units, is basically if the same pattern were to prevail, which if you took our proportionate share based on the black box of 900 units is about 11 to 12 units potentially that could come at us from somebody else, one of these other appeals?
11.61 units, actually.
Oh, okay.
That number I had recently checked.
So the other question that always comes up is, well, who gets the units? And as I heard it stated at the ABAG meeting, it's spread like peanut butter. So if Community X gets 100 units out of its quota, those 100 units are spread across the region, including back to Community X. No one's getting away from it. All right, then I've got my understanding clear. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, part two.
Yes. Next up, how will we meet our RENA? So we actually, as Councilmember Darling and Silva well know, we took this subject to the HCD committee twice, so they're seeing a little bit of a rehash. I do apologize for that. But they requested that we do a capacity analysis, if you will, to see, we've got this draft number, the 5,805 units. Fairly confident that number's not going to change. Okay, how are we going to meet it? So we did do a preliminary analysis. Now, this is something that will be done formally and at a much greater level of detail by the consultants that the city hires to prepare our housing element update in conjunction with staff. But with that said, let's just dive right in. The first category is the easiest one, projects that are already in our pipeline. So basically projects at the start of the 2023-2031 housing element cycle, anything that's under review by the city, filed an application, or anything that is still under construction, we can count that. Accessory dwelling units. We can build in an assumption for a certain number of accessory dwelling units to be produced within the jurisdiction, and that's supposed to be has to be based on essentially past performance, looking at, well, how many ADUs have we seen in general in the previous years, but we can adjust it to accommodate changes, such as changes to state law that have continually increased production of ADUs in Walnut Creek and elsewhere. Something that's a little bit more on the emerging side of things that we're working with HCD on is the ability to count certain units within residential care facilities, RCFEs, residential care facilities for the elderly. Basically, your kind of traditional nursing home where your unit, if you live there, is really just a bedroom and a bathroom, that doesn't count. But if it's in the more independent living sort of situation where you have a small kitchen inside of your unit, that then meets the census definition as a dwelling unit, and therefore we can count it as a dwelling unit towards meeting our RENA, even if there is still a shared dining room, for example, or services provided. And we do have a number of these, of course, already existing in Walnut Creek, and we have some, I think now I should say recently completed. I'm thinking of Villamonte, but also some that are in the pipeline as applications. And so we'd be able to count those and come up with a prediction on that to include in our housing element. And then there's the one that interests most people, which is identifying housing opportunity sites. So these are basically areas that have been identified as they could accommodate new development. And in the case of Walnut Creek, the low-hanging fruit, if you will, that we have identified as being able to potentially accommodate the need are the west and north downtown specific plan areas, first and foremost. Those have recently, of course, gone through extensive planning processes and have environmental clearance, CEQA clearance, and we did a significant bit of upzoning. They're, of course, in downtown. They're anchored on the BART station. There's, as we are seeing, a high level of demand in those areas. We also identified as a potential, an area that we have creatively decided to call, at least at staff level, South Downtown. This is an area, it's essentially the block where you've got Ross, Trader Joe's, Palm Court Plaza on the other side of California. That is an area that is identified by our current general plan as, the general plan calls for the creation of a specific plan. And when we were considering undertaking that or proposing to undertake that work in 2019, we did an analysis to determine, well, what's the upside in terms of commercial floor area and residential development. Most of that would be mixed-use development. And so we calculated that out. So what are these numbers? Well, in the pipeline, probably about 2,000 units. So obviously that's a big chunk right there of the 5,805. This is stuff that's essentially done at this point. It's either under construction or in review at the city, so we can count those now. ADUs, we're anticipating a total of about 250 to 300 ADUs to be built within the city over the 8-year period. That's about, on an annual basis, that's about twice the rate of production that we saw from 2017 to 2019. However, the rules at the state level have changed significantly and are making it much easier to build ADUs, and also added ADUs as an option in multifamily areas and mixed-use areas that did not exist before. And it's worth saying that the production levels we saw from 2017 to 2019 were actually double what we saw prior to that, when the state laws changed at that time as well. The state likes to change its housing laws, at least in the last 10 years or so. So we feel pretty confident about that number. Residential care facilities, based on recent production and interest from the development community that we've been receiving in the planning division, we're expecting perhaps 200 to 300 additional units that could qualify as units for RHNA in the 8-year cycle. That is an estimate. I will say that of all these numbers, that's the one where it is the most, really is just an educated, I don't want to say educated guess, but in that realm, but it is a small percentage of the total number. There's a lot more certainty in the other numbers, I would say. In terms of the 3 housing opportunity sites that I had mentioned, west and north downtown, we actually have numbers out of those specific plans, in particular out of the environmental review for those specific plans. Over the life of those plans, the EIRs anticipated a total of 3,300 units to be built. Now, those plans are 25 and 30-year plans, and here we're talking about an 8-year cycle that is, about 5 years into those plans. But we do feel that it is, well, for one thing, those numbers were somewhat conservative in their initial calculation, and it was, again, done for the purposes of CEQA review. But also we have seen, further increase in just the demand in the market for housing in those areas in particular. And so, though we might not reach that total number in the 8-year cycle, we do feel that a very large percentage of that is a reasonable assumption. The south downtown area, just looking at the existing zoning on the books now, figure there's about a capacity for another 400 units. And then if we look at the existing opportunity sites that are in our current housing element that have not yet been redeveloped, many of which have been upzoned, however, we feel that we probably look at about 300 to 400 additional units in those areas. And in fact, that is a higher number than what those sites are allocated under the current housing element. And the reason why is because we've seen consistently for years now that developers, when they look at the allowable density range on a property, they look at the maximum as, here's what I'm going to build, whereas our assumptions were very conservative and we were looking at the midpoint. And so essentially we want to take credit, for, it's reasonable to take credit for what we've actually seen happen here in Walnut Creek. And HCD is okay with that sort of thing. So we see there being, like I said, about 300 to 400 units possible there. So that adds up to 6,500 to 6,700 units potentially in terms of being able to meet the RHNA of 5,805. Again, this is a preliminary calculation. If we were to look at a new specific plan for South Downtown, and of course that would take direction by this council to assign that as a work program, there's potential upside for about 850 additional units. What's not included, and then that brings us up to 7,300 to a little over 75, or up to 7,550 units. So my main takeaway for this, and again, these are preliminary numbers, but that 5,805 unit number, it's big, but I think we're going to be okay. At least where we're standing right now, it seems like we're headed in the right direction. And what's not included in these is, for one thing, what about additional opportunity sites? We don't want to put all of our eggs in the South Downtown basket, and the council may decide not to put any eggs in the South Downtown basket, and that's perfectly fine. So there are potential opportunities maybe for, say, more senior housing in Shadelands, or just dispersed infill sites. It always surprises me when somebody comes out of the woodwork with 1.5 acres here, 3 acres there, and they're ready to build something, and the zoning is there. So this preliminary review that is in the table before you, again, this was really the low-hanging fruit of adding up numbers. And once we started seeing that, we're in a pretty good place, we decided to wait for the further review by the housing element consultant, the actual official review, to formally designate sites and calculate their potential capacity. And then another thing that's not mentioned is, well, what about density bonus? So as you may know, if new housing development comes in and they provide a percentage of the units as affordable to very low, or moderate income households, under local law and as well under state law, they get a bonus. They get additional density allowed. They're allowed to build more units. Classic example actually is the 1910 NOMA project, where Fuddruckers used to be, and as I understand will return in the future, so we can all have our French fries with the nacho cheese sauce. But there they had, they received, I think it was I forget the exact density bonus. I want to say it was about 35%. This is one of those things Margot to tell me more accurately, but because they provided a percentage of the units as affordable to, I think it was low-income households in that case, under state law, they were able to add a good number of additional units. And so right now, we've never taken that into account in our housing opportunity sites analysis in our existing housing element, for example. And so the question remains, and this is something we would work with HCD, is can we build that assumption that a certain percentage of development coming in will do a density bonus, and then can we take credit for it? And I think it's a safe assumption because we are definitely seeing interest from the private development community, not just affordable housing developers, to do that sort of thing. So I keep mentioning how this was a preliminary analysis. And what goes into the formal analysis? Well, of course, the zoning, in order to count a housing opportunity site in the housing element, the site must allow for housing, obviously, but it has to be by right. It can't be something that is conditionally permitted, where you have to get a conditional use permit to have housing. So we wouldn't be able to count those. And we have to be able to demonstrate that the site can reasonably accommodate the densities that we are saying will occur there. So, think physical constraints, things like that. Obviously, if there was some steep hillside lot and we were saying, you could put some big giant apartment building on there, well, maybe not because of the topography, for example. And so we'd be looking at a parcel by parcel level analysis of, the physical characteristics, as well as ownership constraints and market constraints. And this is actually the part that's new under state law, where in the past it was just, hey, is the property zoned for the housing you say is going to go there? Yes? Okay, great. You're good. Now, we actually have to demonstrate that housing is likely to be constructed within the 8-year cycle. That's the new rub. And, well, what does that really mean? Again, parcel by parcel, detailed analysis, physical constraints analysis, but that's where we get into then about ownership constraints, for example. Well, is there a store on that property that just signed a 40-year lease? Okay, maybe it's not likely to be redeveloped in the next 8 years. And then also looking at market constraints. If we are projecting that some type of housing is going to go on this property, but in fact the market has not supported that type of housing in the region, well, then that calls into question our analysis. And so, again, that's why I was saying, everything we've been talking thus far, it's preliminary analysis. This very highly detailed parcel by parcel analysis will occur as part of the housing element update with the help of a consultant. But what if it's still not enough? Well, we've got those other opportunity sites that I had mentioned, and just throwing out ideas here really, but maybe senior housing in Shadelands. There's actually some of that being proposed at the moment. Dispersed infill sites. Perhaps looking at strengthening our ADU program. We actually have, through a grant-funded program right now, we're preparing a permit-ready ADU plan set, or actually a series of plan sets, so that people in the city could, essentially they'd be off-the-shelf plans, and they would save them the cost of hiring an architect. And so that should result in more ADU production. We could look to strengthen our programs. Perhaps increase the minimum densities that are required in our multifamily and mixed-use zones. That would be amending the zoning ordinance and general plan. Maybe increasing the maximum densities in our residential zones. Or perhaps allowing residential in what are otherwise purely commercial zones. These are all options that could be explored if, after doing the opportunity sites analysis with the housing element update, it turns out that we're still shy of the mark on that 5805. This is just meant to say that there are still other things that we could look into should the need arise. So what are the next steps? Well, I keep talking about the housing element update and the consultant. We're expecting consultant selection to occur next month, and the update, I'm sorry, the kickoff for beginning work on the update to occur in August. And one of the first steps in that update will be to do that official determination. We've kind of front-loaded that into the update process because we want to have as much time as possible if work is needed to build capacity on our opportunity sites through the mechanisms that I mentioned or others. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. I'm gonna go to the Housing Committee first, and then we'll go. So let's start, Councilmember Silva. There was a stare down going on. I'm going to Councilmember Silva.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. And I'm particularly want to talk about, well, actually, I have some technical clarification questions. Are we allowed to count all ADUs now?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought there was a second part to that. Just, you mean if an ADU is built now, can we count it as a?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, we can, depending on the size of the ADU, we can count it as being moderate income, meeting our moderate income number rather than just the.
You read my mind. So basically, this is size determined HCD. The smaller it is, the more likely it gets counted as a mid-market or below market rate, medium or low.
Essentially, yes. The HCD does give us some leeway making that determination, but we have to be able to justify it. And so, for example, the way we do it right now is looking at the rental rates for rental units in the area, and essentially calculating kind of a price per square foot. And, obviously, smaller units tend to rent for less than larger units. And there does come a point where the going market rate actually falls into the moderate income category. And so ADUs that are small enough to fit into that range that they're typically rented at a low enough rate to be a moderate income, we can count them as such, even though they're not deed restricted, they're not income restricted.
So basically affordable by size.
Affordable by design, yeah.
And are we able to, will the consultant be helping us predict that of the 250 to 300, how many are going to be market rate because they are too large, and how many will be mod rate because they're smaller?
Yes, in conjunction with us, we would of course also look at just what's production been in the city and what applications we have on file.
Okay,
and
thank
looking
you.
at the range.
My next question is about these residential care facilities. So let's take Byron Park. Is that a residential care facility? It is apartments. It's independent or assisted living. There's also memory care, which they don't let them have a kitchen in the memory care unit. So it's really not a good idea. But those units count. But we can't go back and retroactively start to count those.
No, we can't.
There's another math problem. So for the future, the additional project that's being proposed in Shadelands, not only will the straight apartments potentially count, but also the assisted living apartments that may have congregate and assisted care.
It depends on the physical characteristics of the individual units, but basically if they have cooking facility, if they have individual cooking facilities, yes, they could count.
So let's go to this consultant having to do this parcel by parcel analysis. It's one thing to determine that the topography isn't a 45-degree angle into a creek, which there are communities that were listing those as their housing opportunity sites. But it's another thing to determine whether the ownership structure, market conditions are really what's going to happen to the industry. But how ownership structure, there's one site here in Walnut Creek that they brought forward a proposed change from a shopping center to a mixed-use housing. And then it turns out there's two property owners, and one of the property owners decided his land was more valuable than it really was, and so the deal unraveled. Are we really going to be able to predict things like that?
Not with a perfect level of fidelity, no. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we can do what we can do, and as strict as HCD and the state laws are, there still is a recognition of that. And this is actually where one of the factors where having a well-qualified consultant comes into play, because if they've already gone through this cycle with these current rules in, say, Southern California, they already know what will satisfy HCD. And so they'll know how to guide us towards a similar conclusion of satisfying HCD. You know, how deep do you have to go? Which assumptions can you make and which assumptions are too far? But there is a much higher level of work that will be needed when compared to previous cycles. I can tell you that I myself, though we had housing element consultants for the current and previous cycle, I myself actually did the housing opportunity sites analysis and wrote that section of the element. That's not something that we would be able to handle in-house this time.
So when is the new housing element due? January of '23, or is that by when it has to be approved and the clock starts?
I would need to double check with Margot. I think I see her name on here. Hoping she'll turn on her camera. There she is. Great. And her microphone.
Because I was going to ask the question, how long to get the inventory done? Because that sounds like a lot of work.
So we do need to have a certified housing element by, I believe it's January 31st of 2023, but we need to have a draft housing element much earlier than that. So I would say around October, because it can take several back and forth discussions with HCD to get it certified. So we aim to have the draft available by October. The draft that council has adopted.
And that's a draft that has already been through some public process, as well as all of the detailed technical work of the consulting team and staff.
Correct. And that's the very reason why we're front-loading that portion of the update to the beginning of the process.
Which October, 2021 or 2022?
22.
Can I tag on that?
Yeah,
Just for a
22.
quick question on process? Does the draft housing element go to the planning commission, and what other city commissions before it comes to the council?
Planning commission and the council, and presumably we would probably have some meetings at the HCD committee of the council. But in terms of what's legally required is planning commission and the council.
Okay.
So how long do we think the process of really analyzing the inventory that you've identified, the potential sites, how long do we think that's going to take before we have to have potentially the other conversation about where else are we going to dig in the bag?
I think Margot would be able to speak more knowledgeably as to the amount of time needed to do the analysis. In terms of the time needed to, if for example, we need to rezone, we have up to 3 years beyond the housing element update.
Right, but we have to have more of the policy level conversation, you know,
Yes.
because it's not just, oh, let's throw everything in the bag we can think of. There's a difference between the idea of more senior housing in shadelands, strategic, or allowing for some office buildings to get bigger and be office, residential, mixed use that no one has thought of. But anyway, I'm not naming a site, but that's what I meant. You thought of it, I'm not. So how long will this take?
Let me defer to Margot.
Yeah, hi, it's Margot again, the housing manager. I don't actually have a good estimate to provide to you. I can say that we have a decent amount of time for the housing element. I did recently speak to a consultant who did their last one in 6 months. That's including the opportunity site. So we would be asking the consultant to start on the opportunity site kind of right away. That would be one of the first tasks, and they would do that concurrent with a lot of the community outreach and the stakeholder meetings. So I would expect, my best guess right now, I would say 3 to 6 months.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's go to Councilmember Darling.
Thank you, and thank you for digging through this. So when we talked about this at HCD, it looks like your numbers have updated slightly since then, but your general sense is that with the existing zoning, we probably have within it enough sites that we can meet the ABAG numbers.
I feel very confident that we should be able to reach the 5805 number at least. I mean, do I think that all 3,300 units projected in the west and north downtown for 25 years will be built in this portion? I can't say that with 100% certainty, and I'd be surprised if every last one of them were built. But of course, as you saw, the numbers that we saw as potential for capacity went well above the 5,800. So I think there's enough margin for error. And we hadn't even started looking at the higher hanging fruit of trying to identify individual, dispersed sites, which are certainly out there and which actually ABAG has helped. They're providing some computer analysis tools that'll somewhat assist us in identifying sites should that be necessary.
Okay, and then when we go through and look at the opportunity sites, are we going to need to do a separate analysis that shows that it's feasible to meet the split between, below, because that's where you start to get into the real challenges?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I actually forgot to mention that. So, very good point. The question is right now we're just talking about this big number, the 5805, and I haven't mentioned anything about the breakdown of affordability levels. And the reason for that is, and this is somewhat of a simplification, but in short, the state view of for affordability is that density equals affordability. They've established what they call default density, where if an opportunity site can accommodate at least that density, then it is assumed to be able to support the economies of scale necessary to develop below market rate housing. In the case of Walnut Creek, that default density is 30 units to the acre, which is actually on the low end for multifamily in Walnut Creek. We more typically see kind of 40 to 100 units and above to the acre in our core area. And so, as an example, almost all the opportunity sites in the current housing element are above that default density. And so that's why we didn't have any problem demonstrating the ability to meet the affordability levels. And so far, the sites that we've been looking at with this RENA capacity analysis also fall into the higher density levels where the affordability issue shouldn't be a problem.
So we won't have a problem with the fact that in past, we've been able to get about 10 or 15% of our housing into those affordable categories. By using that density, we'll be able to say, even though history would not suggest that that is true, that we will be okay. Hope will triumph over history.
Yeah, I mean, we have what we have to demonstrate is that the sites are likely to be developed at all, not that they be developed at affordability levels. We do have to have policies and other programs in place to demonstrate to the state and to satisfy HCD that we're doing a good enough job at being able to encourage or facilitate the actual production of some level of affordable housing. But at least so far, the state does still recognize the fact that affordable housing requires significant public subsidies that don't exist at the moment. So it is still really just that particular aspect is where we're really much more in the kind of planning into things rather than the actual real life production.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Mayor Pro Tem Francois.
Thanks, Andy. On the likelihood of being constructed in the next...
Is your mic on?
Thank you. The question about the likelihood of being constructed within the next 8 years, does the state provide any regulatory or statutory guidance on that issue?
In the statutes, no, I don't believe that it does at any high level. We do start getting into more kind of the policy interpretation of HCD. And based on my actual direct conversations with consultants, as well as just past experience with previous housing element updates, I will say that there is a certain level of negotiation almost, a certain level of convincing to be done at the state level, rather than just a simple checklist. You've done this, okay, great, you've met the requirement. There is, it does fall a little bit into the gray area.
Okay, so that provision is new. The provision that we plan for affordability is new. And then there's, I thought...
The affordability, that has not changed. With the default density, that was in place with the current housing element cycle. I forget if it was the previous.
Okay. And then there was something in the staff report about how now the state will not allow you to count units that you counted in one housing element in a subsequent housing element that had never been the rule before. So how will that play into, let's say that the allocation is 5,800 units this 8-year cycle, assuming there's another 8-year cycle, that it could also be a large number like 5,800 units. What's the strategy in terms of providing the number of units that are likely to be built in the next 8 years, but not all the units in total?
So there is not a prohibition for the reuse of opportunity sites from one cycle to the next, but there are restrictions and there are additional requirements that we have to meet in demonstrating the likelihood and viability of development. That was basically meant to address, there are jurisdictions out there that shall remain nameless that just kind of pick the same site every year and say, hey, it's zoned, even though they know that there's no way in heck it's actually ever going to happen. And so this is intended to fight that. As far as, the real world, if you will, in which we operate here in Walnut Creek, and where we're actually making a real actual effort at identifying sites, I will say that even if we had almost no zoning, I don't think we would necessarily meet that 5,800 unit of actual production. The limiting factor, I think, really gets into the market. There's only so many developers out there. There's only so much money out there. There's only so much materials out there, and that's really showing itself right now, actually. And the law does not ignore that fact. It does allow the reuse of sites, but we have to be able to demonstrate that. If we attempt to reuse a site in, I was going to say 8 years, but it'd be, I guess, more like 10 years, because the cycle doesn't start till 2023. If we reuse a site, we're going to need to be able to demonstrate that, that something has changed, or that there's some reason at least why we think, well, this time it's going to happen. We can't just automatically roll it over, but there is no prohibition.
Okay. It's getting a distinct sense that this is a lot of more art than science in terms of doing housing elements and getting HCD approval for them. I know there's a pending law that would allow you to count converted units. Do you have any idea or estimate of how many of those we might see in the next 8 years?
We have not done that analysis, so I couldn't answer, I guess.
And then finally, this concept of under construction is the idea that if a certificate of occupancy has not been issued for a unit until after January 31st, 2023, we get to count it for that cycle.
That's correct, even if we counted it the previous cycle because it was under review or under construction. It's an odd loophole, but HCD themselves implemented it.
Cool, thanks.
All right. Well, another question? Or what am I saying? We haven't. No. Yes.
All right, so of our former housing element, how much actually got built? Do we have any kind of ratio of accomplishment?
I see Margot appear on the screen. She can rattle these numbers off the top of her head.
Oh, gosh, I'm not sure I can do that. I think it was in your presentation, wasn't it?
It's in my staff report, I think.
Do you have a slide for that?
I don't have a slide, but actually I think it
There
is
was
in
a
the
staff report
as well.
in February I left it on my cutting room floor. Staff report in February.
Yeah, I can tell you that in the last cycle, we definitely exceeded the above moderate, and then we only met a portion of each of the affordable categories. I think we had the highest number of units in the very low income category, but I think it was about 100 and something.
So there is table 3, which is on the top of page 6 of the staff report. It provides the production numbers thus far, or at least through December of 2020, for our current housing element cycle. And it shows that we're already at 189% of our above moderate allocation. The moderate low and very low, though, range from 7 to 16%. As a total, as of December 2020, we had met 84% of our total allocation through 2023. So we've done pretty well.
The percentages are fascinating, but count units. And do we have a?
Sure. Let's see. So if we're looking at permits issued, above moderate, 1,692 units. Moderate is 57, low is 26, very low is 96.
Okay, and I can't remember what you said though. 1,600 something was our overall allocation number of units that we were supposed to encourage?
2235 in the current
Okay,
housing.
so we are short no matter what from our allocation.
Our allocation through 2020, we've achieved, in terms of permits issued at least, 1,871 out of 2,235.
Not bad.
Correct.
But we still could make the number because this was as of December 2020, and there's still 2 years in this current 8-year cycle.
And I'm excited.
Unless we want to roll over minutes.
I was going to say I'm excited, but if there's no penalty for not making them and you know, it takes a little extra to get it.
Please don't let
through the-
certain legislators hear that.
I just wondered. I'm not saying it's a good idea. If we identify all these places and somebody builds a house or a development someplace else in the city, they get special permission. Does that count toward what we set out to start with? So,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If somebody builds housing on something other than an opportunity site, it does count towards our RENA.
okay, the school play yard, they managed to find a way to build 35 houses. We get to count those as part of our.
Absolutely.
Okay. You pointed out that homes aren't built by cities, homes are built by developers. I'm assuming that part of this is to force the cities to remove barriers from development, i.e. those cities that were so content with what they had, they didn't want to add another 2% additional residences, and this is to force us to do what we're supposed to do, which is to make us welcome development in our city to get some housing going.
Yeah, the one of the main intents of the housing element, as specified by the state, is to break down barriers, if you will, that are preventing housing from being produced.
What are the consequences if we don't do it? We identify the properties, we do everything else, and no.
And it just doesn't happen, you mean?
It just
Doesn't get
doesn't
built?
happen. Are there any consequences? And
At the moment, no.
okay.
It's just that you're subject to the, like SB 35 type laws, which allow for housing by right under certain circumstances. If you don't make your.
Okay, but if you're not attractive to anybody built there for whatever reason, and I'm not saying that Walnut Creek is even approaching that category, but you cannot convince anybody to build, and you've tried really, really hard, there are no consequences.
None.
To the city.
Yeah, there are no penalties.
Okay.
Well, developers have certain rights to develop in a more streamlined fashion if you don't do that.
Okay. How does Measure A play into this, or does Measure A play into this at all?
Everything that we plan for has to comply with Measure A. I would say Measure A really doesn't become an issue until if at some point in the future it is just, if the whole city is built up to the Measure A height limit and 6 stories and all the rest where that's allowed, and it's literally not possible to shoehorn another unit in under Measure A, at that point, then we've got an issue on our hands. And honestly, I don't see that ever happening. And then if
Not while we're on council.
No, since they have gratefully found 50.
I mean, we've, you know, I would say that for the most part, I really don't think that Measure A has had as large of an impact on Walnut Creek as people think it has. You know, maybe it's kept some taller commercial office buildings from occurring, but housing, you know, housing from a construction standpoint is much more feasible when you're building wood frame, and wood frame construction typically falls under our Measure A height limits. And, you know, obviously there's exceptions to that here and there where there's like a 30-foot Measure A limit or something along those lines. But I don't think it has impacted, with a few exceptions, I don't think Measure A has had that great of an impact on Walnut Creek.
Okay, thank you. I'm excited that's a comment, sorry.
So I'd like, thank you, Everett. I had a few questions in there that have all been answered at some point or another, so I'd like to open up to public comment at this point. See if we have anybody from the public that would like to make a comment, and if so, please use the raised hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio only, if you'd like to provide a public comment. For those who desire to provide public comment on this consideration item, please raise your hand now. As a reminder, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make their oral remarks. The Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. Written comments submitted have been and will during this item be posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record but will not be separately read into the record. Also, please note that during public hearings and consideration items, group spokespeople are allotted 10 minutes in lieu of other members of the group speaking on this item. We trust that everyone will follow the rules. And at this time, I ask the city clerk if there are any members of the public who would like to provide comments.
Yes, we have a hand raised. I'll go ahead and bring in Catherine Wally.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
Wonderful. Hi, good evening, Council, once again. I'm sorry, I was not planning on it, speaking on this agenda item, so I apologize for not having any prepared comments. I do understand that the RENA allocation of units for our city is large and will place additional demands on our city and on our resources as we work to meet the ABAG number. However, I would like to encourage the city to see this challenge as truly a rich opportunity to strengthen and diversify our community. I returned to Walnut Creek to purchase a home in the city of my birth to be close to my family. However, the biggest negative for me about the city, and one that has my family sometimes wondering if we should move or have my child go to schools outside the region, is actually the relative lack of diversity in our city when it comes to race and class, and the ways in which this lack of affordable housing in our city and the barriers to building affordable housing in Walnut Creek contributes to this reality. We currently use metrics and frameworks to conceive of cities like Walnut Creek as being desirable places to live in ways that I would like to perhaps ask us to challenge. One such metric that we've talked about today was the designation of having good schools. And oftentimes what we think of when we think of good schools is those metrics are often based on raw test scores, which correlate strongly with socioeconomic variables, as well as test score growth. And when measuring whether a high school, such as high schools are good schools, these types of metrics often take into account a college readiness factor, which is measured by standardized testing and SAT scores and graduation rates, variables that correlate strongly with race and class. So for me, a good school is not necessarily what we have in Walnut Creek because of the relative lack of diversity on those measures. So I think that this is an opportunity to make our schools stronger in ways that don't necessarily correlate with what sort of the white wealthy metrics usually are used. So let's do this thing. Let's go with positivity into this adventure. And
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Any more public comments?
I don't see any additional hands raised.
All right, thank you. So we'll close the public comments on that, bring it back to council for any further questions or comments. And I don't believe we're looking for any kind of a motion. This is just hearing the report and getting the numbers on this. So why don't we'll start with Mayor Pro Tem Francois.
Just a quick question, maybe for Margot. I'm curious if she has an estimate for how many density bonus units we've obtained over the last 8 years or so.
Well, I don't have a number on the top of my head. What I can tell you is that until these past 2 years, and actually to date, the only density bonus units that have been constructed have been tied to 100% affordable projects. So it's hard for me to estimate just because we had some pretty high bonuses in some of those projects where they took advantage of like a 150% bonus. But what I can say on a market rate project, we've only to date that I'm aware of have approved two projects. One had 11 very low income units. That was 1910 NOMA. They're not yet constructed, but they're under construction, I believe. And then the other one was on California. I can't remember the address, and that was a smaller project. So there's only two affordable units, and they received a couple bonus units, whereas 1910 received 35 bonus units.
I guess in terms of the density that was achieved from both of those projects too, it sounds like it was less than 100 units.
Well,
And
1910 NOMA ended up, their final count was 135 units. The other one on California was, the final count was 27 units.
Yeah. I guess where I'm going is, how do you separate out what was the bonus and what's allowed under the zoning? I could see that could be problematic, but that's the consultant's problem. And so we'll trust that they can figure that out. Okay, thank you.
Do you want to make any further comments
I think that this is certainly a challenge, but because of the efforts that we've made to date, we're pretty well situated to meet this challenge, including the two specific plans that we've already done the environmental review for and have already been adopted. And I think further testament to that is the direction the council gave to the developer of the Toyota site to do a mixed-use project, including housing there. So the BART project, I could go on, but we are a city that has embraced housing in locations where it's appropriate to do so, including in areas near BART and transit. And I think we're in a well-situated and well-positioned to meet this challenge as a result.
Thank you, Matt. Councilmember Silva?
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you first to staff for all of the work on this and getting us ready and really taking the Housing Committee seriously when we said, maybe we should kind of like do a pre-search just to see what the issues might be. I have, first of all, I appreciate Catherine Wally's comment, and I know many of us have had children at Las Lomas High School. There are more than 30 languages that are the home languages in our Walnut Creek School District and Las Lomas schools. So it's not just affordable housing, but we have a very diverse community, and this will create greater diversity, and that is absolutely wonderful. The community has changed significantly in the 35 years that we've lived here, and we marvel at it every time we come downtown, which is just great. I have one concern that it's a strategic concern, because I think we need to move forward with what we're doing. There's a 45-day appeal period, and having sat on as an alternate for ABAG, but I have been swapped in and out at numerous of these meetings. The rumor mill is that Santa Clara is going to want to dump more units to the East Bay, and that San Francisco is going to appeal on a basis of equity and make what is best described as an interesting argument, because they're internally fighting amongst themselves as to how to protect their own exclusionary housing in certain neighborhoods. While I don't think we should appeal our numbers, because I don't think we should be spending our time on fool's errands, I do think we should be setting some kind of policy letter and submitting it at the right time to say, to make our case that you can't send more, that is not right, that we need, and really argue that case that Santa Clara is where those jobs are and they need more housing, and there's a housing imbalance, and that San Francisco is where those jobs are and they need more housing. And while we are challenged by the large number, and hope we can do it. But I think we need to do that strategically. Otherwise, I get very worried that they won't hear from us and they'll think we could take more.
Well, I couldn't agree more with that. San Jose and San Francisco need to step up with they have the imbalance.
Well, and it's not San Jose, because Sam LaCarter will take units. It's Santa Clara County.
Santa Clara
and there are
County,
certain
it's the county,
communities
yes.
in there that are.
Right. They need more housing. Let's go to Councilmember Haskew.
So until Councilmember Silva's statement that we still have to be on our toes, I was really excited about the fact that we could not only identify on the back of an envelope more than we needed, but there is a chance that the consultant will still attach that. Now, here's the thing. Now that you've mentioned that we are likely to be the recipient of more, do we keep this secret? Do we not share that we could take more? Or, just kind of just say, yeah, oh God, we've got it. We're going to graciously accept 5,800 and do our darndest to find places. Shoot, we're not going to give up our open space that's voted for by the people and all the other things. But we're going to put ourselves together and get 5,800 so that they don't dump it on us. I think that we pretty much need to complain a little bit about our number and not make it look easy.
So translated, we shouldn't take an ad out on the Jumbotron at 49er Stadium?
We should, but we should say, we made it by the skin of our teeth. I agree. Walnut Creek is an incredibly, we don't get a lot of credit for how diverse we really are. If you take the number of languages, it's rare for me to be downtown and not hear a different language than English. We have a great deal of diversity, and I think we have more than people acknowledge. I know from walking when I campaigned, I'd walk into a neighborhood and think, oh my gosh, it's going to be one of those Walnut Creek neighborhoods. And as I saw the people that were living there, I was so pleased to find out that there were people of many races and as many colors as people come in. I appreciate that this will give us an opportunity to be more diverse and more enriched by other cultures. I appreciate that we do have kind of spare change, and we should be grateful for that spare change. I know I'm just breaking my own rule. Thank you for clarifying things. This is not an easy. It's not. It's a foreign language. It's like learning foreign source income to know what's taxable in the United States. It is not a natural. It's not anything that normal people would be able to comprehend. And I would wager that almost everybody who started to watch this section has gone to sleep by now. So thank you for doing this. I think I've been as silly as I need to be. And thank you. Thank you for all your effort.
Thank you.
Councilmember Darling?
Same thing, thank you. I know we encouraged you to kind of give us this back of the envelope so we knew whether or not we were really going to have to stretch. And I think that's good news for our city because we've done a good job of planning for the density in the places that make sense. And I'm glad that we don't have to go off and start talking about putting density in places where it creates greenhouse gas problems, traffic problems, things like that. I do agree with Councilmember Silva that while it does not make sense to appeal, it does make sense to let them know that we have done a good job, but we need to take care of our own financial future. We need to maintain our ability to develop jobs here in the East Bay. And we expect that from a greenhouse gas perspective, it is very appropriate that those cities in the South Bay and out on the peninsula that have large employee populations provide the housing for those employees. I think that's a smart thing to say at this point. And that's my comments.
All right, thank you. And I'll also reiterate, Andy, thank you and thank staff for putting this together and helping to decipher calculus for us as it relates to housing. I felt like this was the most intense math class I've had since college. So I appreciate that. Obviously, we're doing well, and I think it is important to keep an eye on things. I also think it's important to communicate this to the public and what these RHNA numbers mean. I think probably all of us here hear from the public often about why is there so much development? Why does the council say yes to everything? Why is this, why is there so much construction? We need to get this issue, this item in probably less complicated than what you went through tonight, but maybe in the nutshell or other ways of communicating this so that the public understands why is Walnut Creek involved with these kind of discussions and why are these projects proposed and approved, and the importance of it as well. So I think that that's the communication absolutely to ABAG, but also out to our own residents. And again, thank you. Appreciate this. And that brings us to our closed session that we're going to be.
One thing, Mayor, if I could briefly, so if agreeable for council with respect to a letter, staff could work with the HCD committee and craft a letter and obviously send it at the appropriate time frame. That way we don't have to come back to council for adoption, if you're okay with that.
And we have to figure out when the appropriate time frame is, because we want to be careful not to have it viewed as an appeal. And the other thing is there were some letters sent by Contra Costa County back in November, October, that would be good source documentation, so that we're still driving from that same message, which is job, housing, balance, greenhouse gas. Those jobs need to be, and the housing need to be kept where those jobs are.
Okay.
Do head counts, do head nods
Head nods. All right.
work for?
Thumbs up. There you go.
For we approve?
Okay, that works. Okay, this brings us to, thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
This brings us to our closed session. So next on the agenda item is that closed session, and following an opportunity for public comment, the city council will reconvene in the closed public comment. I know. We'll reconvene in the closed session in the third floor conference room pursuant to conference with labor negotiators for unrepresented employees, including department directors, city manager, and the city attorney. If there's anybody that has a, yes, let me ask Councilmember.
Are we closing our regular session now, and is this when we do our?
No.
We will be getting to that. Are you talking about the closing it?
Yes.
Yes, that we'll be getting to that. When I open the public comment period, use the raised hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio only. You've all heard this before, which will alert staff that you have a public comment you would like to provide. We ask that everyone who wishes to speak on an item, please use the raised hand feature to state your intent to speak when the item is called. Please wait your turn, and once brought into the meeting, state your name and city of residence for the record. As the council is conducting these meetings via video teleconference, and given the COVID-19 pandemic and the increased number of speakers that have wanted to make comments on various issues during our meetings and consistent with city policies related to public comments, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make your remarks. The council will accept oral comments. Written comments submitted have been and will be posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record, but will not be separately read into the record. City Clerk, do we have any members of the public to speak on this?
Mayor, I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, thank you. So seeing no speakers, the City Council will now reconvene in closed session, but before doing so, I would like to note that tonight's meeting is being adjourned in memory of Phyllis Caesar and Louis Tamayo. Phyllis was an engaged member of our community. As an active member and founder of the fundraising group for civic arts programs in Walnut Creek, she organized the annual fundraiser for the arts at the Shadelands facility. Phyllis was appointed to the City Council to the Walnut Creek Civic Arts Commission and was a lifelong subscriber to the Diablo Ballet and the California Symphony. Phyllis played the flute and was active in small ensemble. Her interest did not stop with the arts, however, and I should say that I was also on the Arts Commission with her for all 6 years, and it was a pleasure and an honor to serve with Phyllis on that. Phyllis was also a member of the League of Women Voters of Diablo Valley, and during each election helped to register voters, as well as working on access to health care for individuals in need. Phyllis worked for candidates and ballot measures that exemplified good government locally and at the state level by phoning voters and walking precincts and passing out brochures. The League gave Phyllis a recommendation for her excellent work for democracy in Contra Costa County. Personally, Phyllis was a soccer mom and a leader in the Amigos de Americas program for youth participants. She sold grapefruit to go to Latin American countries such as Costa Rica and Mexico. She represented the values and the spirit of Walnut Creek, and she worked behind the scenes to make Walnut Creek a wonderful and vibrant place to live, and we will miss her deeply. On Friday, July 11th, we suffered another significant loss in Walnut Creek. Police Services Officer Louis Tamayo. Louis is remembered by staff as a true team player. Louis was always eager and willing to help out, was a hard worker and enthusiastic about his job. He managed the taxi and convenience vehicle permit program for the city and had a positive working relationship with the vendors and companies he managed. Louis added value to any task he was assigned, whether that was as a bilingual translator for the patrol and investigation divisions or following up on identifying suspects. Louis began his career in law enforcement as a volunteer with the Enrichment Police Department and later as a volunteer cadet with the Walnut Creek Police Department. He was goal-oriented, and while working full-time as a PSO for the city of Walnut Creek, he attended Cal State East Bay, where he majored in communications and attained his bachelor's degree. Louis was the first in his family to attend college. Perhaps the greatest testament to Louis' character is the high regard with which his coworkers held him. Juan Maldonado says about Louis, "I'd like to think of him like the little brother that I never had. I tried my best to guide him on the right path. I first met Louis as an eager explorer back in the day, and he was always held that same excitement about working for Walnut Creek Police Department throughout his career. Louis was a kind soul, the type of person who would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it, greeting everyone with his signature smile each day. He always had a great attitude and would always try to help others any way that he could." Detective Coffin shared, "I remember meeting Louis for the first time when he came in to apply for the position of police cadet. He was wearing ill-fitting dress clothes, was sweating profusely, and was fumbling his words. Despite all of this, we had a good feeling about him. He was honest, had a willingness to learn, and a drive to explore a career in law enforcement. And not long after this interview, I took Louis on probably his first ever police ride-along. As we drove around the city, I asked Louis why he wanted to be a police officer. And I remember him telling me that he wanted to be a police officer for the same reason that I chose to be a police officer, because he wanted to keep people safe. Louis told me a story about hearing gunshots as a child while laying in bed and about having to fall asleep scared and how he wanted to do his part to ensure that life was a little bit better for others. This, in my mind, summarizes who Louis Tamayo was, as evident by him always volunteering to help with police department functions including Toys for Tots, the Special Olympics Torch Run, or Tough Mudder. Louis was always looking for some ways to help others, to build a better community, and to do his best to keep people safe. That's from Detective Coffin. This evening, we pay our respects to Louis' mother, father, and brother, and today we mourn the loss of one of our own, Louis Tamayo. And with that, we'll adjourn to closed session. Thank you all.